Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where privacy is a luxury you can't afford, where 6 people share 3 rooms and the rats have better navigation skills than most delivery drivers. We're talking early 1900s city tenement. Life the kind of existence where your neighbour's breakfast argument is your alarm clock and the walls are so thin, you know Mrs. Biss's O'Brien's husband snores in E-flat. You're about to experience a typical day in one of those cramped, Coles-McKessented apartments stacked 6 stories high, where immigrant families somehow carved out lives between the bedbugs and the tuberculosis. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this without developing either chronic respiratory issues or an intimate knowledge of everyone's bathroom schedule within a 50-foot radius. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I'm always curious whether you're in Tokyo at breakfast or Toronto at midnight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The darkness in your tenement apartment isn't complete darkness, not really. There's always that sickly yellow glow seeping under your door from the hallway gas jet that the landlord keeps burning partly for safety, mostly because it's cheaper than installing electric lights. You're swimming up from sleep, your brain still foggy, but something's dragged you toward consciousness. It's not quite 4003 in the morning, and the sky outside your single window is still that deep charcoal colour that belongs exclusively to the hours before dawn. Then you hear it, the clatter. It's the milk wagon down on the street, 6 stories below, its iron-rimmed wheels striking cobblestones with that distinctive rhythmic percussion that's become your unofficial alarm clock. The milkman is shouting something to someone, probably the night watchman finishing his rounds, and their voices carry up through the narrow air shaft between buildings like they're having their conversation directly in your bedroom. Let's be honest, they basically are. In a tenement, the concept of personal space is more of a philosophical debate than an architectural reality. You try to sink back into sleep, pulling the thin wool blanket up towards your chin, but it's too late. You're awake now, and once you're awake in a tenement, staying asleep becomes an Olympic-level challenge. From the apartment directly next to your, so close that your beds are probably separated by 8 inches of plaster and leaf yew. Here, Mr. Hefferson, Kaminsky's morning cough. It's a deep, wet, rattling thing that seems to come from somewhere around his boots. He's had that cough for 3 years now, and historians still argue whether the factory dust or the tenement mould deserves more credit for destroying his lungs. Maybe it's a collaborative effort. The cough goes on for almost a minute, interspersed with throat clearing that sounds like he's trying to excavate something substantial. You've learned to sleep through most of the building's symphony of human sounds, but this particular cough has a way of penetrating whatever unconscious state you've managed to achieve. Through the wall behind your head, the one you share with the Rosenberg family, you hear their baby starting to fuss. Little Sarah, maybe 6 months old, working herself up to a proper wail. You know it's Sarah because you've memorized every resident's schedule and sound profile. When you live this close, you become an unwilling expert in your neighbors' lives. You could probably write their biographies at this point, complete with detailed chapters on their digestive patterns and marital disputes. By the early 1900s, New York City alone had over 2 million people crammed into tenements, with some buildings housing up to 4,000 souls under one roof. That's basically a small town stacked vertically, except with worse plumbing and more intimate knowledge of each other's business than any small town would tolerate. Your husband, squeezed beside you on the narrow bed, lets out a long sigh that suggests he's awake too. He doesn't say anything speaking costs energy, and you'll both need every ounce of that today, but you feel him shift, his shoulder pressing against yours in the cramped space. Your bed, a rickety iron frame with a mattress that's more memory than cushion, takes up most of the bedroom. And yes, calling it a bedroom is generous. It's more like a large closet that someone optimistically designated as sleeping quarters. From somewhere above you, think the 7th floor, though in a tenement, sound travels so creatively through air shafts and heating ducts that pinpointing its origin requires detective skill. Someone's emptying a chamber pot. You know this because there's that distinct liquid splash hitting liquid, followed by the scrape of ceramic against wood. It's one of those sounds you never expected to become familiar with. Yet here you are, lying in the dark, mentally tracking your upstairs neighbour's bathroom schedule. The street is waking up around you. Besides the milk wagon, you can now hear the rumble of an early delivery truckone, of those newfangled motorised things that rich business owners are starting to use, much to the horse's unemployment concerns. A cat fight erupts somewhere in the alley, all yowls and hisses, then abruptly stops. Either they've resolved their differences, or a well-aimed boot has resolved it for them. Some scholars claim that tenement residents in the 1900s actually slept better than modern city dwellers because they were so physically exhausted from 12-hour factory shifts that nothing could keep them awake. Other historians point to medical records showing chronic sleep deprivation and stress-related illnesses were rampant in these communities. The truth probably depends on whether you're the person doing the exhausting labour or the person studying it from a comfortable university office a century later. You stare at the ceiling gore where you know the ceiling is in the darkness, and listen to your building breathe, because that's what it does really. It inhales and exhales the lives of its 200 occupants, sighs with their movements, groans with their weight, wheezes through its ancient pipes and suffering woodwork. Dawn is still 45 minutes away, but your day has already begun. You wait another 10 minutes, listening to the building's morning symphony grow louder before finally surrendering to the inevitable. Your bladder has opinions about the situation, and those opinions are becoming increasingly vocal. The chamber pot under your bed is already halfway full from last night. Yours, your husband's, and your oldest daughter's contributions, and you're going to need to empty it soon anyway. Might as well join the morning migration. You swing your legs out of bed, your feet finding the cold floorboards. The chill shoots up through your soles, making you instantly more awake than you prefer to be at this ungodly hour. You're still wearing yesterday's chemise because undressing fully for bed is a luxury that requires both privacy and a heated room. You have neither. You pull on your skirt, the everyday one with the patch near the hem that you've gotten quite skilled at hiding in your movements, and reach for the chamber pot. The porcelain is cold against your palms, and you're careful to keep it level as you stand. Mrs. Goldstein, 2 doors down, once tripped while carrying hers, and the hallway smelled like a New Jersey chemical plant for 3 days. Nobody lets her forget it either. In a tenement, your mistakes become community property and eternal entertainment. You ease your bedroom door open, trying not to wake the 3 children sleeping in the main room. They're scattered across 2 narrow beds like puppies, all tangled limbs and soft breathing. Your youngest, Tommy, has somehow rotated 90 degrees and is now sleeping perpendicular to his intended direction, 1 foot dangling off the mattress. Children possess this magical ability to sleep through anything, a gift that evolution clearly intended as compensation for having to grow up in a tenement. The hallway greets you with that particular perfume that defines tenement life, a mixture of boiled cabbage, coal smoke, human bodies, and something unidentifiable that might be despair or might just be old wood rot. It's dark except for that gas jet flickering near the stairs, casting dancing shadows that make the peeling wallpaper look almost intentionally textured. You're not alone. Mrs. Sping whistles J by Ball2. Kowalski is already at the toilet door, shifting her weight from foot to foot in that universal dance of urgent need. She's holding her chamber pot with both hands, and she gives you a weary nod of solidarity. Behind her, Mr. Chen from the 3rd floor has just emerged from his apartment, also chamber pot equipped. You take your place in line, 3rd in queue, and settle in for the wait. This is the reality of tenement life that doesn't make it into the romantic immigrant narratives. 1 toilet for every 20 to 30 people, sometimes more. The 1901 Tenement House Act tried to mandate better conditions, requiring 1 toilet per 2 families at minimum, but enforcement was about as reliable as a politician's promise. Landlords discovered that working on it could be stretched indefinitely as long as they paid the occasional fine, which was always cheaper than actual renovations. "She's been in there 8 minutes, Mrs. Kowalski mutters, jerking her chin toward the closed door. I counted. You believe her. When you're desperate, time becomes elastic and hyper-quantifiable. You can feel every second stretching out like taffy. The toilet calling it. A water closet would be generous. Basically a wooden box built around a toilet bowl, ventilated by a small window that opens onto the air shaft. Which means it's ventilated in theory only because the air shaft is a vertical tunnel that traps smells more efficiently than it disperses them. It's like the building's digestive system designed by someone who fundamentally misunderstood how digestive systems should work. Finally, the door opens and Mrs. O'Brien emerges, looking vaguely apologetic but also defiant. She's a large woman who moves with the confidence of someone who has stopped caring what others think about her bathroom schedule. She empties her chamber pot into the toilet, gives the chain a perfunctory pull-you, hear the cistern overhead gurgle and reluctantly release water and shuffles back toward her apartment without making eye contact. Mrs. Kowalski practically lunges through the door. You hear her gasp of relief, even through the thin wood, which tells you more about her morning than either of you probably wanted to share. Mr. Chen catches your eye and shakes his head slightly, a small smile playing at his lips. Bathroom humor is the same across every culture, apparently. Historians debate whether these communal toilet arrangements actually fostered community bonds or simply created low-level chronic resentment among neighbors. Some scholars point to the social networks that developed around shared hardships, arguing that intimacy breeds solidarity. Others note the documented fistfights over bathroom access and suggest that maybe forcing 30 people to share one toilet wasn't the community-building exercise some romantics claim. You shift the chamber pot to your other hand, trying to keep your grip secure. The last thing you need is to be the next Mrs. Goldstein, immortalized in neighborhood infamy. Your shoulder aches from yesterday's laundry work hauling water, and wringing clothes requires muscles you didn't know you had until they started screaming in protest. From somewhere below, you hear children's voices rising in argument. The Moretti boys, probably, fighting over something with the passionate intensity that only siblings can muster at 5 a.m. Their mother's voice cuts through, sharp and quick, and the argument dissolves into sullen silence. Mrs. Kowalski emerges after 3 minutes you counted, naturally looking substantially relieved. She empties her pot, pulls the chain, and gives you a grateful nod as she passes. All yours. You step into the tiny space and close the door. The smell hits you immediately, a concentrated essence of every person who's used this facility in the past 12 hours, barely masked by the cheap lye soap someone's left on the narrow shelf. The toilet bowl has a brownish ring that no amount of scrubbing seems to eliminate. The wooden seat is cold and slightly damp, but it's yours for the next few minutes, and in a tenement that counts as luxury. You finish your business, empty your chamber pot into the toilet, and pull the chain. The cistern groans like it's personally offended by your request, then reluctantly releases a trickle of water that's supposed to flush, but mostly just redistributes things. You've learned not to inspect the results too closely. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, especially before sunrise. Back in your apartment, you move quietly through the main room where your children are still sleeping. Your oldest, Rose, has one arm flung dramatically over her face like a tragic heroine in a penny dreadful. She's 13 and has started sleeping with this theatrical flair that suggests she's been reading too many romance novels borrowed from the lending library. Your middle child, Jacob, is curled into a tight ball, and Tommy remains sideways, now drooling onto his pillow with the peaceful abandon of a 5-year-old who has no idea what property taxes are. Your first real task of the day waits in the corner, the Castillon coal stove, squatting there like a temperamental metal toad that may or may not cooperate with your plans for hot water and breakfast. This stove is simultaneously your best friend and your nemesis, your source of heat and cooked food, and also your source of smoke, soot, burns and carbon monoxide scares that send you rushing to open windows in the middle of winter. You crouch beside it, your knees protesting. You're 32, but your joints think you're 50, courtesy of tenement living and 12-hour factory shifts before you had children. The stove door creaks open with that familiar squeal that probably wakes at least one child per morning. Inside, yesterday's fire has reduced itself to a few stubborn embers nestled in the ash bed, glowing orange like tiny angry eyes when you poke them with the iron rod. This is the crucial moment. If those embers are too far gone, you'll need to start from scratch with newspaper and kindling, which means 10 extra minutes and a lot of cursing under your breath. If they're still viable, you can coax them back to life with some strategic coal placement and prayer. You reach for the coal scuttly dented metal bucket that lives beside the stove like a faithful but ugly dog. The coal inside is the cheap stuff, naturally. The good anthracite coal burns clean and hot, but that's for people who have disposable income and don't need to choose between heating and eating. You get bituminous coal, the kind that smokes like a forge and leaves a black residue on everything within a 6-foot radius. Your landlord buys it in bulk and charges you slightly less than highway robbery rates, which he considers a generous civic service. By 1905, coal stoves were the primary heating and cooking source for tenement families, with the average household burning through about 2 tons of coal per year. That coal had to be hauled up multiple flights of stairs, usually by the women and children of the family, because clearly carrying 50-pound bags up 6 stories builds character. Or hernias. Historians still argue whether the character-building explanation was genuine belief or just convenient justification for child labour. You select 3 lumps of coal, each about the size of your fist, and position them carefully over the embers. This is where art meets science. Place them too close together and you'll smother the embers. Too far apart and they won't catch. You need the Goldilocks zone of coal arrangement, which you've learned through years of trial and error and occasional mornings eating cold breakfast because you killed the fire. The embers glow brighter when you blow on them gently, your breath feeding them oxygen like you're resuscitating tiny orange patients. Smoke immediately curls up, not the clean, barely there smoke of good coal burning properly, but the thick, acrid smoke of cheap coal that hasn't quite caught yet. Your eyes start to water. You turn your head to cough, trying not to inhale directly. The stove's flue is supposed to draw this smoke up and out through the chimney system that services your entire vertical column of apartments. In theory, smoke goes up, fresh air comes in, and everyone lives in pleasant, well-ventilated comfort. In practice, the flue draws about as well as a broken straw, and smoke has this annoying habit of deciding to explore your apartment instead of exiting through proper channels. Some of that smoke is definitely curling back into your room right now. You can see it in the dim pre-dawn light, twisting and pooling near the ceiling like it's considering its options. Your husband grunts from the bedroom, a grunt that translates roughly to, "I smell smoke. Is that supposed to be happening? And also, I'm not getting up to help." You grab the iron poker and adjust the coal lumps slightly, creating a little more breathing room. One of them has started to catch, a small flame licking up the side. Victory. You add 2 more pieces, building a careful pyramid structure that your grandmother taught you back in the old country, wherever that was. Geography gets fuzzy when you're focused on not freezing or starving. The stove starts to draw better now, the flames growing more confident. You can feel heat beginning to radiate from the iron surface, not much yet, but the promise of warmth. In winter, this stove is the difference between survival and hypothermia. In summer, it's the difference between eating cooked food and being the weird family that eats everything cold because they can't bear to turn on the stove when it's already 95 degrees inside. There's a knack to managing the dampers and vents, a whole vocabulary of airflow that you've learned through necessity. Too much air and the coal burns too fast, sending your fuel costs skyrocketing. Too little, and you get carbon monoxide build-up, which has killed more tenement families than anyone likes to discuss in polite company. The quirky historical tidbit that nobody tells you: some tenement families would sleep with their oven doors open in winter to maximize heat distribution, creating a sort of deadly roulette where you gambled frostbite against asphyxiation and hoped probability landed in your favor. Your stove is finally warming up properly now, flames visible through the grate, smoke mostly going where it should. You'll give it 10 more minutes before putting the water kettle on. Your back aches from crouching, and your hands are already smudged with coal dust that will take serious scrubbing to remove. But you have fire. That's today's first victory, claimed before the sun even thinks about making an appearance. While the stove continues its journey from resentful cold metal to grudgingly cooperative heat source, you turn your attention to breakfast. And really, calling it breakfast suggests a level of culinary ambition that doesn't quite match your reality. You're not preparing breakfast so much as you're performing an economic calculation that happens to result in something edible. You retrieve yesterday's bread from the wooden box on the shelf, your pathetic excuse for a pantry, which is really just a crate nailed to the wall with a piece of cheesecloth tacked over the front to keep the roaches from throwing parties inside. The loaf is a sad, dense thing, the kind of bread that Italian immigrants would weep over before disowning. It's 2 days old now, which in tenement math means it's entered that phase where it's too stale to enjoy, but not quite stale enough to justify throwing away. You've got maybe 3/4 of a loaf left. 7 people in this apartment. Your husband, 3 children, plus your husband's younger brother, who's been temporarily sleeping on the floor in the main room for 6 months now, and your mother-in-law, who occupies the smallest bedroom that's basically a glorified closet. 7 mouths, 1 partial loaf of bread, and the next payday is 3 days away. The mathematics of poverty are precise and unforgiving. You could stretch this bread to give everyone a decent slice, but then there's nothing for tomorrow. Or you could ration it thin today and tomorrow, gambling that your husband's Friday wages will actually materialize on time, which is not a bet you'd take if you had any other options. You decide on thin slices, your bread, knife which hasn't been properly sharp since 1898 saws through the crust with that sound that's halfway between cutting and tearing. You manage 8 slices, each one approximately the width of a wealthy person's sense of social responsibility, which is to say, not very thick at all. The kettle is rattling on the stovetop now, not quite boiling but getting ideas about it. You retrieve your coffee tin from the upper shelf, the one that's labelled Buckles Ariosa coffee, but hasn't contained actual Buckles' coffee in at least 2 years. Now it holds your homemade blend, maybe 20% real coffee grounds, carefully hoarded and stretched, mixed with 80% roasted chicory root that you buy in bulk from the shop on Hester Street. Chicory coffee is one of those things that immigrants discovered when actual coffee became a luxury item filed under things we'll buy when we win the lottery that we can't afford to play. Roasted chicory root tastes vaguely coffee adjacent if you squint your taste buds and have low expectations. It's bitter, it's brown, it's hot technically. That's 3/4 of what coffee is supposed to be, right? By the 1900s, coffee adulteration was so common that pure coffee had become the exception rather than the rule in working-class households. Some historians estimate that up to 70% of coffee consumed in tenement districts was actually chicory, roasted grains, or even ground acorns. The pure food movement was just beginning to gain traction, though it would be years before regulations actually protected poor families from buying sawdust labelled as spices. You spoon your chicory coffee blend into the battered tin pot, using approximately 3 spoonfuls for what you optimistically hope will caffeinate 7 adults and near adults. Tommy's too young for coffee, but Rose has started demanding it like she's a worldly sophisticate, and you've given up fighting that battle. Pick your wars carefully when you've got limited energy for warfare. The water finally achieves a proper boil, and you pour it over the grounds, watching the mixture turn that promising dark brown that almost looks legitimate in the dim morning light. Almost. In bright daylight, it looks exactly like what it is, hot brown sadness in liquid form. But in the pre-dawn dimness of a tenement kitchen, you can maintain the fiction that this is real coffee, the kind that wealthy people drink while discussing the stock market and their property investments. Behind you, someone's stirring. You turn to see Rose sitting up in bed, her hair forming a nest that would make most birds jealous. She blinks at you with that unfocused expression of someone whose brain hasn't fully connected to their body yet. "Is there breakfast?" she asks, her voice rough with sleep. "There's food," you answer, which is technically true while being spiritually evasive. You've learned to parse language carefully when discussing meals. Breakfast implies abundance and choice. Food is honest about the situation without being demoralizing. Your mother-in-law emerges from her closet bedroom, already fully dressed because she apparently sleeps in her clothes like a soldier, ready for surprise inspections. She surveys your bread-slicing operation with those sharp eyes that never miss anything, calculating the thickness of each slice with the precision of a jeweler evaluating diamonds. You can see her doing the math, determining exactly how much you're rationing and judging whether it's adequate. She doesn't say anything, though. She's been poor longer than you've been alive, and she knows that commentary on insufficient food serves no purpose except to make everyone more aware of their hunger. Your husband stumbles out of the bedroom, still tucking his shirt into his trousers. He's a broad-shouldered man who works in a textile factory, operating machinery 12 hours a day, and he needs more calories than your skinny slice of bread is going to provide. You know this. He knows this. It's one of those facts that hovers in the air between you like smoke from the coal stove. Scholars debate whether malnutrition in tenement families was primarily due to lack of money or lack of knowledge about nutrition. The reality, frustratingly, seems to be both. Families couldn't afford adequate food, but even when they had a few extra pennies, decades of poverty had eroded their understanding of what constituted a balanced diet beyond something to stop the hunger. You pour the chicory coffee into mismatched cups and mugs, everything chipped or cracked but functional. Function is the highest aspiration of tenement kitchenware. Your husband gets the largest pour because he's got the most physically demanding job. Your mother-in-law gets the second largest because you learned early not to antagonize her before sunrise. Rose gets a proper cup because she's recently decided she's practically an adult. Jacob and your brother-in-law will split what remains. The bread goes onto a single plate in the center of your small table. 8 slices arranged in a circle, like a sad, starchy flower. Everyone will take their piece and supplement it with whatever else they can scrounge an apple from the pushcart vendor. If someone has a spare penny, maybe some oatmeal stretched so thin it's more memory than meal. This is breakfast in an early 1900s tenement, mathematics, substitutes, and the quiet desperation of making nothing stretch into something. Breakfast disappears in about 4 minutes flat, which tells you everything about how adequate it was. Your husband gulps his chicory coffee, winces at the taste but doesn't complain, stopped complaining about the coffee situation sometime in 1903, and heads back to the bedroom to finish dressing. He's got to be at the factory by 7, which means leaving here by 6:30 to account for the walk and the inevitable slowdown when a horse-drawn wagon blocks the intersection. Now comes the morning calculus that never gets easier, no matter how many times you perform it, getting 3 children ready for their respective destinations when you have limited everything. Limited water, limited soap, limited time, limited patience, and most critically, limited choices about what those destinations actually are. You fill your wash basin with water that's been heating on the stove and not hot, but warm enough to be more effective than cold, and retrieve your single washcloth from where it's been drying on a nail by the window. This washcloth has washed more faces than it was ever designed to handle, and it shows its fatigue through thinness and multiple patches. It's less a washcloth now and more a philosophical concept of cleanliness held together by stubborn threads. Rose, Jacob, Tommy faces, you announce, and your children approach with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Tommy comes willingly because at 5 he still believes that adults have his best interests at heart. Jacob, at 9, approaches with resignation, knowing resistance is futile but wanting to register his protest through body language. Rose, at 13, acts like you've asked her to climb Everest barefoot while reciting Latin poetry. You start with Tommy because he's the least squirmy, grabbing his chin and scrubbing at the mysterious dirt that children accumulate even when they're sleeping. Where does it come from? Is there a dirt fairy that visits sleeping children specifically to coat them in grime? You work the washcloth around his ears, those magnificent collectors of filth, while he squirms and makes faces. "It's cold," he whines. "It's warm," you correct him. "Cold would be if I used the water from the hallway tap in January." This is luxury. Jacob's next, and he's got a smudge on his cheek that looks suspiciously like he was playing with the coal scuttle yesterday when you explicitly told him not to. You scrub harder, and he yelps like you're performing surgery without anesthesia. Boys have this amazing ability to be completely oblivious to their own filth while being hyper-aware of any attempt to remove it. Rose you save for last because she's recently developed opinions about personal grooming that involve not being treated like a baby. You hand her the washcloth now significantly greyer than when you started, and she takes it with a long-suffering sigh that could power a small windmill. She makes a minimal pass at her face, probably missing the actual dirt entirely, and hands it back with the air of someone who's just completed an enormous favour. By 1910, child labour was so common that approximately 2 million American children under 15 were working in factories, mines, or as street vendors. The idea that all children should be in school full-time was still considered somewhat radical in working-class communities, where children's wages often meant the difference between paying rent and being evicted. Now comes the shoe situation, which is somehow more complex than international diplomatic negotiations. You have 2 pairs of shoes suitable for school or factory work. Tommy's shoes are holding together with hope and dubious stitching. Rose's shoes are the patched pair your mother-in-law spent an evening cobbling them back into marginally functional status, and they're at least water-resistant if you're optimistic about the definition of resistant. Jacob's shoes disintegrated last week, victims of a puddle and structural integrity failure. The calculation is this. Rose needs to go to school because she's bright, and the truancy officer has started asking questions about her attendance. She's in 7th grade, which is further than you ever got, and maybe she can finish 8th grade and get one of those clerical jobs that don't destroy your hands and lungs. That's the dream you're holding on to anyway, the one that keeps you washing her face with cold rags and scraping together her school fees. Jacob should go to school. He's 9. Children should be in school at 9, learning things like mathematics and geography, and how to read books that aren't just factory notices and eviction warnings. But Jacob doesn't have functional shoes, and the school has policies about minimum footwear requirements because apparently learning is conditional on leather goods. Tommy's too young for school or factory work, though. Historians still argue whether the minimum age laws were actually enforced or just polite suggestions that everyone ignored when bills came due. He stays home with you and your mother-in-law, which means he's actually your assistant in today's labour, whatever that ends up being. Rose, you're going to school, you announce, and hand her the patch shoes. She takes them without complaint because she knows how rare school attendance has become, how many of her friends have disappeared into factories or stayed home to mind siblings. Jacob, you continue, and he looks up at you with those eyes that are too understanding for a 9-year-old. He already knows what you're going to say. You're staying home today. Mrs. Levinsky needs someone to watch her little ones while she goes to the market. She'll give us 20 cents. It's not quite a lie. Mrs. Levinsky does sometimes need child-minding help, and she does occasionally pay for it. Whether she needs it today specifically is something you'll determine after you manufacture the situation. But it sounds better than you can't go to school because you don't have shoes and we can't afford new ones until your father's wages come through, and even then new shoes rank below food and rent on our priority list. Scholars debate whether mothers in tenement families felt guilt about these decisions or simply pragmatic acceptance of economic realities. The answer, you could tell them from experience, is both. You feel both simultaneously, a nauseating mixture of guilt and pragmatism that sits in your stomach like bad fish. Jacob nods slowly. He's not stupid. He knows exactly what's happening. But he's also 9 and powerless and dependent on adults who are barely managing to keep everyone fed and sheltered. So he nods and accepts his fate with the resignation of someone 3 times his age. You scrub his face one more time with the now filthy washcloth, partly because it needs doing and partly because you can't quite look him in the eye while you're rationing his childhood. Your husband finishes buttoning his work shirt, the one that used to be white but has aged into a shade best described as industrial grey, and reaches for his flat cap hanging by the door. It's 6,025 in the morning, and he's got 35 minutes to walk the 12 blocks to the Consolidated Textile Mill on Rivington Street, clock in, and be at his station before the 7 a.m. whistle blows. Being late means having minutes docked from your pay. Being late repeatedly means being replaced by one of the 50 men waiting outside the factory gates every morning, hoping someone doesn't show up. He drains the last of his chicory coffee, and you watch his face contort slightly at the taste. There's no comment, though. You've been married 8 years, and you've developed a sophisticated non-verbal communication system around the inadequacy of your coffee. His face says, "This tastes like someone boiled a boot," and your face responds with, "Yes, well, boots are expensive, and this was cheaper," and his face concedes the point with a slight nod. "There's lunch," you say, handing him the tin pail you packed last night. Inside, 2 more slices of that same bread, a small piece of hard cheese that's seen better days, and an apple that has a suspicious soft spot you're hoping he won't notice until he's already at the factory and too hungry to care. It's not enough food for a man who'll spend 12 hours operating heavy machinery, but it's what you've got. He takes the pail, tucks it under his arm, and for a moment you just look at each other. There's a whole conversation happening in that look, years of shared struggle and stubborn survival compressed into 3 seconds of eye contact. He's 35 but looks 45. His face already showing the deep lines that come from squinting at machinery in poorly lit factories and bearing the weight of keeping a family alive in conditions that seem specifically designed to kill you slowly. Be safe, you say, which is what you say every morning, your small prayer to whatever deity handles industrial accidents and factory disasters. "Always am," he responds, which is what he says every morning, both of you pretending that being careful has any real influence on whether a machine malfunctions or a supervisor pushes for faster production at the expense of safety protocols. He kisses you quickly, dry, perfunctory kiss that's more habit than passion, though there's affection in it somewhere beneath the exhaustion, and then he's gone, pulling the apartment door closed behind him with a soft click. You move to the window and watch him emerge onto the street 6 stories below, a small figure joining the growing stream of men heading toward the factory district. From up here, they all look identical. Dark caps, dark coats, shoulders hunched against the morning chill and the weight of another 12-hour shift. It's like watching ants march toward the anthill, except ants presumably have better labor protections. The textile mill where your husband works runs 2 shifts, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. He's been on the day shift for 3 years now, which is considered a privilege because night shift workers reportedly develop a peculiar grey pallor from never seeing sunlight, like mushrooms or prisoners. The factory floor is a massive space filled with power looms that clatter and thunder so loudly that workers develop their own sign language to communicate over the noise. Your husband's job is operating one of these looms, feeding it thread, watching for breaks or jams, fixing problems before they cascade into expensive machinery damage. By 1900, textile factories were among the most dangerous workplaces in America, with workers facing risks from flying shuttles, unguarded machinery, cotton dust that destroyed lungs, and the constant din that left many workers partially deaf by their 40s. Factory owners were very slowly beginning to implement safety measures, though historians still argue whether this was due to genuine concern for workers or simply the realization that mangled employees were expensive to replace and train. The pay is $10.50 per week, which sounds almost reasonable until you calculate that it's less than 2 cents per hour and needs to cover rent $6 per month for your 3-room tenement apartment, food, coal, clothing, and the various other expenses that crop up with the regularity of biblical plagues. You manage it through a combination of careful budgeting, your own piecework income, and occasionally performing financial miracles that would impress Moses himself. Your husband disappears around the corner, swallowed by the city and the morning crowd, and you're left standing at the window watching an empty street. This moment happens every morning. The departure, the watching, the small knot of worry that settles in your chest and won't fully dissolve until he comes back through that door 12 hours from now. There's always the possibility that he won't come back. Factory accidents are common enough that they barely rate newspaper coverage unless multiple workers die at once, or the fire is spectacular enough to warrant attention. A man can be crushed by machinery, burned by steam, struck by a flying shuttle, or simply work himself into a heart attack, and the factory will express its condolences, dock his final day's pay for the hours he didn't complete, and have his position filled by the next morning. You've seen it happen to other families in the building. Mrs. O'Malley's husband lost 3 fingers to a textile machine 2 years ago and now works as a street sweeper for half his former wages. The Kowalskis' oldest son died in a factory fire at 17 Fell while trying to escape down an exterior fire escape that wasn't properly maintained. The funeral cost more than his family had saved, and they're still paying off the debt to the burial society. The quirky historical tidbit that keeps you up at night: some factories would fine workers for being injured, charging them for the productivity lost during their recovery time. Got your hand mangled in the machinery? That'll be 3 days' wages deducted for the disruption to the production schedule, plus whatever medical costs you can't afford. But standing at the window dwelling on catastrophic possibilities doesn't get the day's work done. Your husband is gone for the next 12 hours, walking toward machinery and quotas and supervisors who treat workers like replaceable parts. All you can do is hope that the machinery behaves, that fatigue doesn't cause a mistake, that the universe decides today isn't the day for tragedy. You turn away from the window. Tommy's pulling on your skirt, asking for something. Rose is looking for her school books. Your mother-in-law is already clearing the breakfast dishes with sharp, efficient movements that somehow convey judgment about your housekeeping. The day continues whether you're ready or not. Today is Monday, which in Tenement vocabulary translates to laundry day, which further translates to the day you seriously question all your life, choices that led you to having 7 people generating dirty clothes in a building with no running water in individual apartments. Laundry in a tenement isn't a chorites, a full-contact sport played against the forces of gravity, chemistry, and your own deteriorating spine. You grab your 2 water buckets from where they live under the kitchen table. They're dented metal affairs with wooden handles that have been worn smooth by years of your grip. Each bucket holds about 2.5 gallons when full, which means each bucket weighs roughly 20 pounds. Remember that number. You're going to become intimately familiar with it over the next several hours. The water source is the communal tap in the hallway, 1 floor down on the 5th story. Why the tap is on the 5th floor when you live on the 6th is a mystery that involves building codes, landlord cheapness, and probably some backroom deal made in 1887 that no one bothered to reconsider. The point is, water lives 1 floor below you, and you need that water 1 floor above where it currently resides. You head down the stairs, buckets clanking against your legs. The stairwell smells like it always: doeswood rot, old cabbage, human desperation, and something that might be a dead rat in the walls, or might just be the building's natural fragrance. Mrs. Chen is already at the hallway tap, filling her own buckets, and she gives you a weary nod of solidarity. Monday is laundry day for everyone, which means the tap sees more traffic than Grand Central Station. You wait your turn, listening to the water splash and gurgle. The tap is temperamental. Sometimes it flows readily, sometimes it sputters and spits like it's personally offended by your need for water. Today it's in a generous mood, and when Mrs. Palm, Chen, finishes, you're able to fill both buckets with only minimal sputtering. Now comes the fun part, hauling 40 pounds of water up 1 flight of stairs. You grip both bucket handles, lift, and immediately your shoulders register their complaint with the management. The first few steps are always the worst. Your muscles screaming, your back protesting, your hands already aching from the metal handles cutting into your palms. You've developed calluses on your calluses from this particular activity, layers of toughened skin that would make a dock worker envious. 1 step, 2 steps, breathe. 3 steps. 4. Don't think about how many steps remain. Think about something else. There's nothing pleasant to think about. Think about the fact that wealthy people have running water in their apartments and probably have servants to do their laundry anyway, and let that class resentment fuel your climb. By the early 1900s, some progressive tenements were being built with running water on every floor or even in individual apartments, but these were the exception rather than the rule. Most tenement dwellers would continue hauling water until well into the 1920s, with some buildings maintaining communal taps until the 1940s. The physical toll on women's bodies was well documented by social reformers, though historians still argue whether these observations led to meaningful change or just well-intentioned reports that gathered dust on shelves. You reach your floor, shove open your apartment door with your hip, and stagger to the kitchen area where you pour both buckets into the large wash tub sitting on the floor. 2 buckets down, approximately 8 to 10 more trips to go. Your mother-in-law looks up from where she's mending a Sherther endless project, mending things like, if she just sews enough repairs, the universe will reward her with prosperity. Water's running slow today, she asks, which is her way of commenting on how long it's taking you while maintaining plausible deniability about actually criticizing you. Water's fine, you respond through gritted teeth and head back out for round 2. Trip 2, trip 3. Your arms are screaming. Trip 4. Your back has joined the screaming chorus. Trip 5. You're seriously contemplating whether your family really needs clean clothes or if aromatic could become your new aesthetic. Tommy follows you on trip 6, chattering about something involving a stick and a dead bug he found, which is apparently the most exciting thing to happen this week in 5-year-old world. You grunt responses while trying not to spill water on the stairs because wet stairs in a tenement are a lawsuit waiting to happen, assuming anyone could afford to sue and assuming landlords cared about lawsuits. The quirky historical detail that no one tells you, some tenement women would form water-hauling cooperatives, taking turns climbing the stairs so everyone got periodic breaks. Others developed elaborate pulley systems to haul buckets up from lower floors, though landlords usually shut these down, claiming they were fire hazards, which was code for your survival strategies. Annoy me. Trip 8. You've achieved a sort of Zen state where your body is in motion, but your mind has departed for somewhere more pleasant, like literally anywhere else. Trip 9. The tap is getting slower now, more tenement dwellers competing for the same water source. Mrs. Goldsteinis, the chamber pot incident, Mrs. Goldsteinis waiting when you arrive, and you both stand there in that special silence of women who are too exhausted for conversation. Trip 10. You pour the final 2 buckets into your wash tub, and the tub is maybe 3/4 full. You need it fuller for a proper wash, but your arms have staged a formal rebellion and refuse to negotiate. This will have to do. Now you get to heat all this water, because washing clothes in cold water is technically possible, but practically useless. You fill every pot and pan you own with water from the wash tub, and arrange them on and around your coal stove like you're conducting some kind of culinary orchestra where everything plays the same note, slowly warming water. This part takes at least an hour. Water heated on a coal stove doesn't boil so much as eventually achieve a temperature that could be described as warmish if you're optimistic. You tend the stove, add more coal, adjust the dampers, and wait. Your day has barely started and you're already exhausted. While your pots of water engage in their slow-motion race toward warmth, you realize you have a brief window to accomplish another critical task, acquiring food that costs less than your dignity but more than your available pennies. The laundry will take all day, but it doesn't require your constant attention during the heating phase. What it does require is you staying near enough to prevent Tommy from deciding the wash tub would make an excellent boat. You grab your market basket woven straw that's seen better decades and count the coins in your household money jar. You've got 37 cents, which sounds like more than it is. That needs to cover vegetables for tonight's dinner, possibly something resembling protein if the universe is feeling generous, and ideally some oatmeal for tomorrow's breakfast. You're essentially trying to perform miracle multiplication of loaves and fishes, except you're starting with pocket change instead of divine intervention. Watch Tommy. You tell your mother-in-law, who nods without looking up from her mending. Don't let him near the wash tub. I raised 6 children, she responds in that tone that suggests she finds your parenting instructions both unnecessary and vaguely insulting. I know about wash tubs. You're out the door before she can elaborate on her superior child-rearing experiences. The 6 flights down feel different, without water buckets trying to dislocate your shoulder, so almost pleasant if you ignore the way the stairwell walls sweat with condensation and mysterious fluids. The street greets you with its usual mid-morning chaos. It's nearly 10 o'clock, and the pushcart vendors have claimed their territories with the precision of military campaigns. Each vendor has their spot, their specialty, and their loyal customers, who they overcharge slightly less than they overcharge strangers. New York's Lower East Side alone had an estimated 25,000 pushcart peddlers by 1900, creating what was essentially a rolling outdoor market that blocked traffic, enraged city planners, and kept tenement families from starving. The street itself is an obstacle course designed by someone with a grudge against pedestrians. Horse manure dots the cobblestones like aromatic landmines. The horses that pull delivery wagons are incredibly efficient at converting oats into street hazards. You've learned to watch your step, though there's always that moment of horror when you feel something squish under your boot and have to decide whether to look down or just live in denial. A vegetable cart parks on the corner of your block, operated by Mr. Shallow Schulman, who claims to have the freshest produce this side of the East River. This is a generous interpretation of fresh. His vegetables look like they've been on a spiritual journey and returned somewhat diminished. But his prices are reasonable, which in tenement economics trumps freshness every time. "Good morning, Mrs. Kowalczyk," he calls out, mispronouncing your married name in a way that you stopped correcting 3 years ago. Beautiful day for beautiful vegetables. The vegetables are demonstrably not beautiful. His potatoes have more eyes than a surveillance agency. His onions are sprouting green shoots like they're trying to escape back into the earth. His carrots have achieved a flexibility that suggests they're considering a career in circus acrobatics. But you need vegetables, and he's here, so you begin the ancient ritual of haggling. "How much for the potatoes?" you ask, pointing at a basket of specimens that look like they've been through some kind of tuber war. £5 for 12 cents, he announces with the confidence of someone who knows you'll never pay that. "I'll give you 8 cents, you counter, because haggling is expected and offering full price would insult both of you. 10 cents, and I throw in 2 extra potatoes. 9 cents, regular weight. Deal." He seems delighted, like you've just agreed to something that benefits him enormously, though you both know these potatoes were probably going to be his chicken feed tomorrow if he didn't sell them. You move to the onions. 3 large ones go into your basket after similar negotiation. Then you spot some cabbage that looks marginally alive. Scholars debate whether cabbage in early 1900s tenements was chosen for its nutritional value or simply because it was nearly impossible to kill and stayed edible longer than most vegetables. The answer is probably yes. Halfway through inspecting a questionable cabbage, you hear the warning shout, "Ice wagon!" Everyone on the street immediately goes on high alert. The ice wagon is both blessing and menace it. Brings ice for your icebox if you're fancy enough to own an icebox, but it also travels at speeds that suggest the driver is late for an important appointment with destiny. The horse is massive, the wagon is heavy, and physics is not on the side of pedestrians who fail to pay attention. The wagon thunders past, and you catch a glimpse of the Iceman sitting up top, reins in hand, looking like he's piloting a missile rather than a commercial delivery vehicle. Chunks of ice glisten in the morning sun, already melting, dripping water onto the street where it mixes with the horse manure to create a sort of urban soup that you're trying very hard not to think about. Nearly took out Mrs. Finkelstein last week, Mr. Schulman comments, shaking his head. Woman's got reflexes like a cat now. Silver lining, yes? You add a small bunch of carrots to your basket, the bendiest ones because they're cheaper, and do the mental math. You're at 26 cents spent. 11 cents remaining. You need something with protein, but meat is expensive, and your 11 cents laughs sadly at the concept of affording animal flesh. You got any eggs, you ask, already knowing the answer will hurt your budget? Eggs. Yes. Fresh this morning. This means they're probably 3 days old, but in tenement vendor speak, fresh is more of a spiritual state than a temporal one. 3 cents each, or 5 for 14 cents. 5 eggs would be perfect tune for each person with 2 left over for cooking into something tomorrow. But 14 cents means you'd be 3 cents over budget, which means no oatmeal tomorrow. The quirky reality of tenement shopping, vendors often sold items individually rather than by the dozen specifically to accommodate customers who literally couldn't afford to buy in bulk. You could buy 1 egg, 1 potato, 1 carrot, 1 onion, whatever mathematical combination kept you within your available pennies. 4 eggs, you negotiate. 11 cents. He acts like you've personally wounded him, clutches his chest, mutters something in Yiddish that's probably complimentary. But he wraps 4 eggs in newspaper and takes your final 11 cents. Your basket now contains 5 pounds of battle-scarred potatoes, 3 onions with opinions, 1 cabbage that might be sentient, some gymnastic carrots, and 4 eggs wrapped in yesterday's news about something you can't afford to care about. Dinner is sorted. Tomorrow's breakfast is a problem for tomorrow's you. You navigate back through the pushcart maze, dodging another horse pile and a child who's apparently playing a game that involves standing directly in the path of adults. The street smells like vegetables, manure, coal smoke and poverty, the signature scent of tenement neighborhoods everywhere. 6 flights up. Your legs remember the water bucket trips and protest accordingly. But you've got food. And that's today's second victory. You return to find your water pots steaming gently on the stove well. Steaming is optimistic. They're more like producing thoughtful wisps of vapor that suggest warmth is a theoretical possibility. Your mother-in-law has somehow prevented Tommy from drowning himself in the washtub, though he's standing suspiciously close to it with a wooden spoon, clearly plotting aquatic adventures. Water's ready, your mother-in-law announces, which is her way of saying, I've been waiting for you to return so I can judge your laundry technique. I need to start the piecework first, you respond, and you can feel her disapproval radiating across the room like heat from the coal stove. In her worldview, laundry takes precedence over everything except possibly immediate death, and even then she'd want to see documentation. But here's the brutal mathematics of tenement survival. Your husband's $10.50 per week covers rent and coal with maybe $1 left over for luxuries like food and not dying. Everything else, food, clothing, medical emergencies, the occasional nightmare where someone needs shoes, requires additional income. That income comes from piecework, the delightful system where factories outsource labor to tenement families who work for rates that make indentured servitude look like a competitive benefits package. You move to the corner where your piecework materials live in a wooden crate, bundles of pre-cut fabric pieces, a small sewing kit, and the instructions for this week's project. You're sewing men's work pants, or rather, you're sewing one specific seam on men's work pants. The factory cuts the fabric, distributes the pieces to tenement workers, and you sew the inseam, then return the pieces to the factory, where someone else sews a different seam, and eventually these pants emerge as finished products that the factory sells at a markup that would make you weep if you had time for weeping. Your rate, 4 cents per pair of pants? You need to complete at least 50 pairs today to make $2, which is what your family needs to supplement your husband's wages, enough to reach the barely surviving threshold. 50 pants means 50 inseams, each requiring approximately 8 minutes of focused sewing if you're efficient and don't let your mind wander to topics like the fundamental injustice of capitalism or why my hands hurt constantly. By 1905, an estimated 2 million Americans were doing industrial homework piecework completed in tenements with wages averaging between 2 and 6 cents per hour, depending on the task. Children commonly helped their parents, creating a shadow child labor force that wasn't technically in factories and therefore conveniently invisible to most labor reform efforts. Historians still argue whether this system was exploitative opportunism by factory owners or a necessary economic bridge that allowed immigrant families to survive if it couldn't be both things simultaneously. You settle into your workspace at the table, threading your needle with the cheapest thread the factory provides, which breaks approximately every 15 minutes just to keep life interesting. Tommy wanders over, and you know what's coming before he says it. "Can I help?" He's 5. He can barely tie his shoes. But 5-year-olds can absolutely hold fabric pieces, hand you scissors, and learn to make simple stitches that won't pass quality inspection but will at least keep him occupied and make him feel useful. More importantly, every stitch Tommy makes is a stitch you don't have to make, and time is money when money is measured in 4-cent increments. You can sort the fabric pieces, you tell him, which is the entry-level position in the family piecework industry. Put all the left legs in this pile, right legs in that pile. He beams like you've just handed him a kingdom. Children in tenements develop a work ethic before they develop their permanent teeth, which is either adorable or horrifying depending on your perspective on child labor laws. Your mother-in-law doesn't do. Pieceworker hands are too arthritic from decades of this exact work, her fingers twisted in ways that make threading needles an exercise in frustration. Instead, she helps by keeping Tommy on task, preparing lunch later, and providing running commentary on how you're sewing wrong. Everyone contributes according to their abilities and disabilities. You pick up the first piece of heavy canvas fabric that will become the left inseam of someone's work pants and begin stitching. The needle pushes through the fabric with resistance, your thimble taking the brunt of the pressure. 8 minutes per pair is your goal, but the first one always takes longer because your hands need to remember the rhythm. The peculiar quirky detail about tenement piecework, some factories would deliberately distribute different coloured thread than what was specified, then reject the finished work for not meeting standards, refusing to pay. The families would be stuck with unusable, partially completed garments and no wages for their labour. This wasn't a bug in the system, it was a feature that allowed factories to get free work samples or adjust their inventory without paying for the privilege. Stitch, stitch, stitch. Your world narrows to needle and thread and fabric. Tommy sorting pieces with the intense concentration of a surgeon performing delicate operations. Your mother-in-law has started washing dishes from breakfast with water you heated, because wasting heated water is apparently a cardinal sin in her personal religion. 9 minutes for the first pair. Not great, but acceptable. You tie off the thread, bite it to cut it, scissors are, for when you have free hands, which is never, and reach for the second piece. The morning light coming through your single window has that greyish quality that suggests the sun is up there somewhere but couldn't be bothered to shine with any enthusiasm. In wealthier neighbourhoods, people are probably drinking real coffee and eating eggs that don't come individually wrapped in newspaper. Their children are at school, learning geography and literature. They're not sewing piecework at kitchen tables while juggling laundry and child supervision and the constant mental calculation of whether you can afford an extra onion this week. But dwelling on what other people have is a luxury you can't afford, so you focus on what you can control, needle, thread, fabric, repeat. Stitch, stitch, stitch. Jacob wanders over, having completed whatever task kept him occupied, probably avoiding doing anything useful. At 9, he's old enough to handle a needle competently, and his small fingers are actually better at this than your increasingly stiff hands. You want to earn a penny, you ask, and his eyes light up. A penny is a fortune in child economics. Every 5 pairs you complete, you get a penny. He settles in next to you, and you hand him a threaded needle and a fabric piece. His stitches are crooked and probably won't pass inspection, but that's a future problem. Right now, you need productivity more than perfection. Your family production line is now operational, you doing the skilled work, Jacob doing his enthusiastic best, Tommy sorting pieces, your mother-in-law managing logistics and judgment. This is how tenement families survived. Everyone contributing, even when contributing meant 5-year-olds doing factory work at kitchen tables instead of playing with toys they couldn't afford anyway. The wash tub full of water sits in the corner, getting colder by the minute, silently judging you for choosing income over laundry. You'll get to it, eventually, after enough inseams to keep the family from sliding into deeper poverty. 4 down, 46 to go. You're 17 pairs into your quota when Mrs. Bauman's voice drifts through your open window from the apartment next door. Not shouting, exactly, just speaking at that volume level tenement residents have perfected, somewhere between normal conversation and public announcement. It's the acoustic sweet spot that says, I'm talking to you specifically, but I don't mind if the whole floor overhears. Mrs. Kowalczyk, you hear about Mrs. Delgado's daughter? You pause mid-stitch, because this is clearly going to be gossip worth hearing, and also because your fingers need the break anyway. They're starting to cramp in that special way that suggests arthritis is making reservations for your 40th birthday. What about her? You call back, threading a new needle because the previous thread just snapped for the 3rd time in 15 minutes. Married to that Irish boy from the docks. Her father is furious, she's disgracing the family, marrying outside. You know how it is. Tenement buildings are vertical villages where everyone's business becomes community property within approximately 6 minutes of it happening. The walls are so thin that privacy is less a right and more a pleasant fiction everyone pretends to believe in. Mrs. Bauman probably knows more about your digestive habits than your own doctor would, assuming you could afford a doctor. The Irish boy seems nice enough, you respond, because you've seen him around tall, works hard, doesn't drink away his wages at the corner saloon like some men do. At least he has steady work. Steady work! Mrs. Bauman's head appears in her window now, her substantial bosom resting on the windowsill, like it's furniture. That's what I said. But Mr. Delgado, he's from the old country, you know. Very traditional, says his daughter should marry a nice Spanish boy, not some potato-eating well, you know. Historians debate whether tenement living broke down ethnic barriers through forced proximity or actually reinforced them through defensive tribalism. The reality seems to be both. You lived literally on top of people from different countries, which either made you more tolerant through exposure or more protective of your cultural identity, sometimes on alternating days. From the apartment above the 7th floor, definitely the Rosenberg family, you hear someone practicing violin. Badly. It sounds like someone strangling a cat that's simultaneously trying to sing opera. The notes are technically music, in the same way that your chicory coffee is technically a beverage. That boy needs lessons, your mother-in-law mutters, not looking up from the bread dough she's been kneading. She's right, but lessons cost money, and money is something the Rosenbergs don't have any more than you do. What they have is ambition and a violin that someone probably sold them for $1, with promises that little Moshe could become the next great virtuoso if he just practiced enough. Better violin than no violin, you respond, which is the tenement philosophy in a nutshell. Better something than nothing, better trying than giving up, better bad music than no hope of better circumstances. Mrs. Bauman is still in her window, having moved on to new topics. You heard the landlord's raising rent again? Mrs. Chen says he wants another 50 cents a month starting February. Your hands pause mid-stitch. 50 cents more per month is 2 days of your husband's wages, or 12 pairs of pants, or approximately 30 loaves of bread, or countless other ways to quantify how 50 cents can destroy a family's careful budget equilibrium. He can't do that, you say, knowing full well that he absolutely can do that, and will do that, and there's nothing you can do about it except pay or get evicted. Can and will, Mrs. Bauman confirms, says he's got maintenance costs, needs to fix the hallway tap on the 5th floor that's been leaking for 3 months. You know, the leak he caused by not maintaining the pipes in the first place. The quirky historical reality. Tenement landlords in the early 1900s operated with almost no oversight, raising rents arbitrarily, providing minimal maintenance, and evicting families at will. Some landlords never even visited their properties, hiring superintendents to collect rent and ignore complaints. The buildings generated enormous profits while the residents subsidized structural decay with their health and safety. Jacob tugs at your sleeve. "Mama, I need more thread." You hand him the spool, showing him again how to thread the needle, push it through the eye, pull it halfway, tie a knot at the end. He's getting better at this, his small fingers growing more confident with each attempt. In a fair world, he'd be in school learning arithmetic. In this world, he's learning how to sew inseams for 4 cents per pair. From the fire escape, that metal skeleton clinging to the building's exterior like it's barely holding on, which it probably is, you hear women's voices. Fire escapes are the tenement's social clubs, the place where women gather to shell peas, hang laundry, smoke cigarettes if they're bold, and exchange the kind of information that keeps families alive. You lean out your window to see Mrs. Petrov and Mrs. O'Malley sitting on the fire escape landing between the 6th and 7th floors, both working on their own piecework. Mrs. Petrov is rolling cigars. Mrs. O'Malley is pulling bastings from finished garments, preparing them for final sale. The butcher on Delancey is selling day-old meat for half price on Wednesdays. Mrs. Petrov announces to anyone within earshot, which is approximately 40 families. Tell your husbands to stop by after work. This is valuable intelligence. Day-old meat might smell a little off and require extra cooking, but it's meat, which contains protein, which your family needs. You mentally file this information in the same place where you keep other survival data, which vendors give the best prices, which doctors will see you without upfront payment, which landlords have buildings with slightly less aggressive rat populations. Someone broke into the Levinsky apartment last night. Mrs. O'Malley adds, her voice dropping to that serious tone reserved for actual bad news rather than entertaining gossip. Took everything their rent money. Mrs. Levinsky's wedding ring, even the children's shoes. A collective murmur ripples through the building. You can hear it travelling window to window, floor to floor, the news spreading through the tenement's organic communication network faster than any telephone system could manage. Theft hits different in tenements. It's not just crime, it's existential threat. The Levinskys probably had $20 total to their name, and now they have nothing. "We should take up a collection," someone suggests from a window. "You can't see." "I'll put in 5 cents, Mrs. Bauman offers. "I can spare 3 cents, you hear yourself saying, and immediately regret it because you don't have 3 spare cents, but you also can't be the person who doesn't contribute when a family is suffering. This is the other side of tenement living. The walls are thin and privacy doesn't exist and everyone knows your business, but when crisis hits, those same neighbours become your safety net. Sometimes literally there are stories of children falling out windows and being caught by neighbours on fire escapes below. More often, metaphorically, someone loses their job and suddenly groceries appear outside their door. No one admits who left them. Everyone pretends it's a mystery. Tommy has finished sorting fabric pieces and is now trying to build a fort out of them, which means you'll need to resort everything, but he's been helpful for 45 minutes, and that's honestly more than you expected from a 5-year-old. You return to your sewing, your needle moving with practiced efficiency, 18 pairs done, 32 to go. The rhythm is meditative. If you let it be, push needle through, pull thread, repeat. Don't think about the rent increase. Don't think about the Levinskys getting robbed. Don't think about how your entire life exists within approximately 12 square blocks of Manhattan. Just so. The gossip network will continue operating whether you're listening or not. You're 23 pairs into your quota when you notice Tommy scratching. Not the casual scratch of a child being a child, but the urgent, focused scratching of someone whose skin is hosting an unwelcome convention. Your stomach drops with that special maternal dread reserved for moments when you realize you've been fighting a losing battle. "Tommy, come here." He approaches, still scratching his arm, and you roll up his sleeve to reveal the telltale signs, small red welts arranged in a distinctive line across his inner forearm, the classic breakfast, lunch and dinner pattern that bedbugs leave behind when they're feeling particularly ambitious. Of course, because your day wasn't challenging enough already. "Bedbugs," you announce to no one in particular, your voice flat with resignation. Your mother-in-law looks up from her bread dough and sighs, the deep sigh of someone who has fought this war for decades and knows exactly how it ends. Again. The thing about bedbugs in tenements is that they're not a problem you solve. They're a condition you manage, like chronic pain or poverty itself. You can reduce their numbers through constant vigilance and chemical warfare, but eradicating them completely requires resources that exist only in fairy tales and uptown apartments. The bugs live in your mattress seams, your bed frame joints, the cracks in your walls, behind your peeling wallpaper. They emerge at night like tiny vampires with excellent logistics, bite you while you sleep, then retreat to their hiding places before dawn. By the early 1900s, bedbugs were so common in tenements that their presence was considered almost inevitable rather than shameful. Some public health estimates suggested that up to 75% of tenement apartments housed bedbug populations. Still, families felt social stigma around infestations, as if poverty wasn't humiliating enough without also hosting parasites. You set down your sewing 23 pairs, 27 to go, but this can't wait and retrieve your pest control arsenal from under the kitchen counter. It's a sad little collection, a bottle of kerosene, some rags, a small brush, a metal can that once held coffee but now holds your dignity and whatever determination you can muster for this particular battle. "Jacob, move the beds away from the walls," you instruct. "Tommy, you're going to help Mama hunt bugs." Tommy looks excited about this, which tells you he doesn't fully grasp what hunting bugs entails. Children have this remarkable ability to find adventure in situations that are actually just various flavors of miserable. You start with Tommy's beta narrow cot that's seen better decades. You peel back the thin blanket and examine the mattress seams with the intensity of a detective looking for evidence. And there they are. Small, dark specks that are either bedbug droppings or evidence that the universe has a sick sense of humor. Probably both. You dip your rag in kerosene. The smell immediately fills the room, sharp and chemical, the kind of smell that announces, "I'm solving a problem while possibly creating new health problems." Kerosene kills bedbugs on contact, dissolves their waxy coating, and generally makes their short lives miserable before ending them. It's also flammable, toxic if ingested, and probably doing interesting things to everyone's lung function, but these are the tools available to you in 1905. You wipe down every seam of the mattress, getting kerosene into every crevice where bugs might hide. A few bedbugs emerge from their hiding spots, fleeing the chemical assault, and you crush them with your thumbnail. They pop with a small crunching sound and release a distinctive odor sort of sweet and musty, which some people describe as like raspberries and others describe as like a nightmare. You're in the nightmare camp. "There's so many," Tommy observes with the fascinated horror of someone discovering that the world contains more unpleasant surprises than he previously imagined. "Yes, and we're going to kill them all," you respond with false confidence, knowing full well that all is aspirational at best. Historians still argue whether kerosene treatment for bedbugs was effective pest control or just theatre that made people feel less helpless. The evidence suggests it was somewhere in between. Kerosene definitely killed bugs it touched, but bugs it didn't touch simply waited for you to finish, then resumed their regular programming of drinking your blood while you slept. You move to the bed frame, inspecting each joint where wood meets wood. Bedbugs love these spots dark, protected, close to their food source, you and your family. You find several adults clustered in one joint, their flat bodies engorged with what used to be someone's blood. The kerosene rag hits them, and they convulse briefly before dying. You feel a grim satisfaction that's probably not healthy, but is definitely justified. From the corner, You hear a skittering sound. You turn just in time to see a cockroach hone of those enormous specimens that look like they pay rent and should have voting rights screws across your floor with the confidence of a creature that knows it's nearly indestructible. Cockroaches are the other permanent residents of tenement buildings, and unlike bedbugs, they don't even have the decency to hide during daylight hours. "Get it!" Tommy shouts, and Jacob lunges with a shoe, missing entirely because cockroaches have reflexes that would make professional athletes jealous. The roach disappears behind your coal stove, probably to its roach apartment, where it's telling its roach family about the close call with the giant shoe-wielding predator. You let it go. Fighting cockroaches is a full-time job, and you've already got 2 of those. The quirky historical detail that keeps you up at night. Some tenement families would place the legs of their beds in cans of kerosene or water to prevent bed bugs from climbing up from the floor. This worked until the bugs learned to climb the walls, walk across the ceiling, and drop onto the bed from above. Evolution is amazing and horrifying. You continue your inspection, finding more bed bugs in the second bed, behind a picture frame, in the crack where your wall meets the floor. Each discovery requires kerosene application and manual crushing. Your hands smell like chemicals. Tommy's scratching has migrated from his arm to his neck. You'll need to check him thoroughly tonight, maybe give him a bath in the heated laundry water before it gets too dirty. Behind your walls, you hear the unmistakable sound of rats having a conversation. Well, not a conversation exactly, more like a territorial dispute conducted through squeaking and scratching. Rats use the spaces between your walls as highways, travelling vertically through the building with the efficiency of the transit system that you can't access but are definitely paying to support. "Poison's not working," your mother-in-law observes, listening to the rat sounds. "You put poison out last week, little biscuits laced with arsenic that you placed carefully where children couldn't reach, but rats theoretically could." Theoretically being the key word. "Rats are smarter than the poison," you respond. "They probably have a support group where they warn each other about the dangerous biscuits." You finish treating Tommy's bed, move to Rose's, then to the main bed where you and your husband sleep. Every seam, every joint, every crack gets the kerosene treatment. The room reeks of chemicals. Your eyes are watering. This is your life now, sewing piecework for 4 cents per pair while simultaneously conducting chemical warfare against creatures that have survived since before humans invented civilization. An hour later, you've treated every bed, every piece of furniture, every visible crack. The bedbugs you've killed number in the dozens. The bedbugs still alive and hiding probably number in the hundreds. You've won today's battle, but not the war. The war never ends. You return to your sewing, your hands still reeking of kerosene. 23 pairs done, 27 to go. Outside, that terrible violin practice continues. Somewhere, Mrs. Bauman is probably telling someone else about someone else's business. Life continues, bugs and all. You're 30 unpairs into your quota, achingly close to the finish line, when you hear the distinctive sound of Rose's feet on the stairs. She takes them 2 at a time, the way only 13-year-olds with energy to burn can manage after a full day of school. The door flies open, and she bursts in with the dramatic flair of someone who has important news to share. "Mama," Miss Patterson says, "I could help grade the younger students' arithmetic papers if I stay after school on Thursdays." She's breathless with excitement, her cheeks flushed, and your heart does that complicated thing where it swells with pride and sinks with dread simultaneously. Staying after school means arriving home later. Later means less time helping with dinner preparation, less time watching Tommy, less time contributing to the household's endless list of necessary tasks. But it also means recognition, opportunity, the kind of thing that might lead somewhere better than a tenement apartment and piecework at kitchen tables. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," you manage, setting down the pants you're working on. "We'll talk about it later, yes? Right now I need you to. Also, Jenny Goldstein invited me to her cousin's birthday party on Saturday, and she said there might be boys there from the Uptown Hebrew School. And Mama, can I go? Please. I promise I'll do extra chores. Rose, breathe. You stand up, your back protesting after hours of hunching over sewing. One thing at a time. First, take off your school shoes and put on your house shoes. Second, there's bread and butter on the shelf if you're hungry. Third, yes, we'll discuss the party. After I finish these pants. She deflates slightly. The universal teenage experience of having enthusiasm met with parental pragmatism, but complies. Unlacing her patched school shoes with exaggerated care. Those shoes cost you 3 weeks of piecework income, and they need to last at least another year, so the rule is school shoes only for school, house shoes for everything else. This is the kind of resource management that doesn't get taught in textbooks, but is essential curriculum for surviving poverty. Jacob looks up from his sewing. He's completed 7 pairs now, earning him a penny plus 2 cents more, which has him feeling like a industrial magnate. Rose, you want to help us sew? Mama's paying a penny per 5 pairs. I have homework, Rose responds with the superiority of someone who attends school regularly and has homework to prove it. Miss Patterson assigned us to write an essay about our family's immigration story. I need to interview Badscia. She uses the Polish term for grandmother, one of the few words from the old country that survived the linguistic melting pot. Your mother-in-law looks up from where she's been preparing potatoes for dinner, her arthritic hands moving slowly but steadily through the peeling process. Interview? What is this interview? I need to ask you questions about coming to America, Rose explains, pulling out a piece of paper and a pencil stub that's been sharpened down to almost nothing. For school? About immigration and Ellis Island and everything? The thing about assigning tenement children to write about their family's immigration stories is that it forces them to confront details their parents and grandparents would rather forget. The ocean crossing in steerage, packed like cargo with hundreds of other desperate people, the illness, the death, the children who didn't survive the journey, the humiliating processing at Ellis Island, where inspectors poked and prodded and marked certain immigrants with chalk symbols that determined their fate. By 1907, Ellis Island was processing over 5,000 immigrants per day during peak periods, with families waiting for hours or days to be examined, questioned, and either approved or rejected. Historians debate whether the process was efficient given the volume or unnecessarily traumatizing, but for the people who went through it, the debate is academic. The trauma is documented in their nightmares and their reluctance to discuss it with their American-born children. Your mother-in-law sighs, sets down her paring knife, and settles into her chair with the weariness of someone preparing to open old wounds. What do you want to know? How old were you when you came to America? Rose asks, pencil poised. 23. Your grandfather and I, we married in the old country, then came here. This was 1878, long before you were born. While Rose conducts her oral history project, you return to your sewing. 19 pairs to go. Your fingers are cramping, your back aches, and you've developed a headache from the kerosene fumes that still linger in the apartment. Tommy has abandoned fabric sorting in favor of constructing an elaborate city out of wooden blockswell. Blocks is generous. They're scraps of wood your husband brought home from the factory, offcuts that someone was going to throw away. From outside, you hear children playing in the street, their shouts and laughter drifting up through your window like audio evidence that childhood still exists somewhere. The street is their playground, their social club, their education in physics and human nature. They play stickball in the narrow spaces between pushcarts, race each other around corners, invent games that require nothing but imagination and the willingness to risk getting yelled at by adults. Jacob's eyes keep drifting toward the window, his sewing pace slowing as he contemplates the freedom happening 6 stories below. Can I go play? He asks, already knowing the answer but trying anyway. After dinner, you respond. The standard parental compromise. And only for an hour. And stay where I can see you from the window. This is tenement parenting in a nutshell. Your children need fresh air and exercise and social interaction, but the street is dangerous with horse traffic and wagon traffic and the occasional motor car driver who believes speed limits are suggestions. Plus there are older boys who sometimes start fights and beat cops who sometimes arrest children for made-up infractions, and the general chaos that comes from mixing poverty, density, and limited adult supervision. Some scholars argue that tenement children growing up with street freedom developed independence and street smarts that served them well in adulthood. Others point to the injury rates, the exploitation by older children and adults, and the lack of structured play and education. The truth is probably that it built character in the survivors while destroying the ones it didn't build. Rose is still interviewing your mother-in-law, who's warming to the topic now, sharing details you've never heard before. The ship, it was called the SS Oda. We were in steerage down below with maybe 300 other people. The smell! She shakes her head. You cannot imagine the smell. People were sick, always sick. We had bunks, metal bunks, stacked 3 high, and I was on the top bunk. When the person below you vomited, it would drip through the slats. Babchia! Rose looked simultaneously horrified and fascinated, scribbling notes frantically. You're torn between letting your mother-in-law continue her therapeutic unburdening and protecting Rose from details that will give her nightmares. You settle for intervention through distraction. Rose, after you finish your homework, I need you to set the table for dinner and check if we have any clean dish towels, because if not, I'll need to prioritize washing them when I finally get to the laundry. Ah yes, the laundry. That wash tub of cold water sitting in the corner, judging you for choosing piecework and pest control over washing clothes. The water you hauled bucket by bucket, step by agonizing step, has been sitting there for hours now, probably developing its own ecosystem. You'll need to reheat it before you can actually wash anything, which means more time, more coal, more effort added to an already exhausting day. But first, finish the sewing. 19 pairs to go. You can do 19 pairs. Your hands hurt, your back hurts, your soul hurts a little, but you can do 19 more pairs. Tommy crashes his block city with sound effects, apparently deciding that construction was less interesting than destruction. Boom, he shouts, scattering blocks across the floor. Inside voice. You remind him for approximately the 1,000th time today. He responds by whispering boom at barely audible volume, which is his interpretation of compliance. Good enough. You return to your needle and thread, finding that meditative rhythm again. Push through. Pull tight. Repeat. Tune out the interview, the block destruction, the street sounds, the rat sounds, the ongoing violin massacre upstairs. Just so. 18 pairs to go. You manage to finish 42 pairs of pants before your mother-in-law makes it clear through pointed silence and strategic patrackling that dinner will not cook itself, and someone needs to start preparing it before your husband returns home expecting food. You set aside the remaining 8 pairs. You'll finish them after dinner, maybe by candlelight, if the kerosene lamp oil is running too low, and survey your culinary resources. The ingredients from this morning's market expedition sit on your counter: 5 pounds of potatoes with personalities, 3 onions, 1 cabbage that's still deciding whether to be alive, the gymnastic carrots, and 4 eggs. You need to transform this collection into something that will feed 7 people and somehow feel like an actual meal rather than what it is. Vegetables held together by desperation and prayer. Your cooking equipment consists of 1 large pot, 1 smaller pot, 1 cast-iron skillet that predates your marriage, 2 wooden spoons, a knife that hasn't been properly sharp since the Cleveland administration, and that temperamental coal stove that's currently emanating heat at approximately 60% of what you need. It's like trying to conduct an orchestra where half the instruments are broken and the other half are actively hostile to music. You start with the potatoes because potatoes are the foundation of tenement cuisine, cheap, filling, and nearly impossible to ruin, even with limited cooking skills and worse equipment. You grab your dulled knife and begin peeling, the skins falling away in uneven strips. The potatoes underneath are white and surprisingly clean once liberated from their jackets, which is more than can be said for most things in your apartment. Tommy appears at your elbow, watching with intense 5-year-old focus. "Can I help?" "You can put the peels in the scrap bucket," you tell him, gesturing to the tin pail where you collect organic waste. That bucket will eventually go downstairs to the street, where a man with a cart collects such things for pig farms in New Jersey. Everything has value to someone, even potato peels destined for pig consumption. By 1905, waste management in tenement districts was a complex ecosystem involving multiple collectors, rag pickers for fabric scraps, bone collectors for soup making, swill collectors for organic waste, and scavengers who picked through garbage for anything marketable. Historians still argue whether this system represented entrepreneurial recycling or exploitation of the poor by slightly less poor intermediaries. You dice the potatoes into rough cubes. Uniformity is for people with sharp knives and energy to spare, and drop them into your large pot with water from your earlier bucket hauling expedition. They splash into the pot with satisfying plunks, sinking to the bottom like tiny, starchy submarines. The onions come next. You slice into the first one, and your eyes immediately start watering because onions are chemical warfare disguised as vegetables. Your grandmother taught you a trick. Breathe through your mouth, not your nose. It helps approximately 5%, which is better than 0%, but not enough to prevent the tears streaming down your face like you're having an emotional breakdown over root vegetables. Mama's crying, Tommy announces with concern. Mama's fine, it's just the onions, you explain through your onion-induced tears, wondering if there's a historical record of how many collective hours humanity has spent crying over onions and whether anyone's calculated the economic impact of onion-induced temporary blindness. Jacob has abandoned his sewing to watch your cooking process with the fascination of someone who's starting to understand that food doesn't magically appear. Someone has to make it happen through labor and tears and occasionally cursing under your breath in Polish when the onion is particularly aggressive. You add the diced onions to the pot with the potatoes, then move on to the cabbage. Cabbage requires a different technique. Remove the outer leaves that look like they've been through a war, cut the head into quarters, slice out the tough core, then shred the leaves into strips. Your knife protests this assignment but complies, and soon you have a small mountain of shredded cabbage that will cook down to approximately 1/10 its current volume. The carrots get peeled and sliced. They've maintained their flexibility during the process, which is either impressive or concerning. Into the pot they go, joining the growing vegetable convention. You add water until everything's covered, plus a generous amount of salt from your salt box. Salt is cheap, and it makes everything taste less like poverty. Now comes the protein question. 4 eggs for 7 people is mathematically challenging. You could boil them and give everyone half an egg, but half an egg is somehow more depressing than no egg. At Allet highlights the insufficiency rather than masking it. Or you could scramble all 4 eggs and mix them into the stew at the end, creating the illusion of protein distribution without anyone getting an identifiable piece of egg. You opt for scrambling. You crack the eggs into your smaller pot. The newspaper wrapping clings to one egg and requires excavation. Tiny print transferring onto the shell like temporary tattoos, and beat them with a fork. The yolks and whites blend into that familiar yellow mixture that promises sustenance. Assuming 4 eggs distributed among 7 people counts as sustenance. The quirky historical detail that no one mentions, tenement cooks became experts at what we'd now call stretching food, but what they called making something from nothing. A common technique was adding flour or breadcrumbs to eggs or soup to increase volume without adding cost. It worked until everyone's digestive systems realized they were eating filler disguised as food. Your coal stove is finally cooperating, the heat radiating at useful levels. You position your large pot directly over the hottest part. There's an art to coal stove cooking, knowing which areas are scorching and which are merely warm, and positioning your pots accordingly like you're playing chess with cookware. The vegetables begin their slow transformation, potatoes softening, onions releasing their sharpness into the water, cabbage wilting from its initial rigidity. You stir occasionally with your wooden spoon, watching the water take on a cloudy vegetable broth appearance. It's not fancy, but it's hot and it's food, and it will fill stomachs, which is the holy trinity of tenement cooking goals. How long until dinner? Jacob asks, his stomach apparently having opinions about the timeline. An hour, you estimate, knowing that an hour in coal stove cooking is more philosophical suggestion than precise measurement. Things are done when they're done, which is usually when you're too tired to wait any longer and declare victory over raw ingredients. Rose emerges from her homework corner. I finished my essay. Want to hear it? After dinner, you respond, because your brain has limited bandwidth and right now it's fully occupied with preventing the vegetables from burning while simultaneously planning how to incorporate eggs into this situation without it looking like you're desperately trying to make 4 eggs feed 7 people. Which, to be fair, is exactly what you're doing. Your mother-in-law shuffles over to inspect your cooking, her practiced eye evaluating your technique and ingredient ratios. She doesn't comment, which could mean approval, or could mean her criticisms are so numerous that she doesn't know where to begin. With her, silence is ambiguous. The stew bubbles gently, steam rising and fogging your single window. Outside, the afternoon is fading toward evening. Your husband will be home in 2 hours, hungry from 12 hours of factory work. The stew will be ready. The eggs will be scrambled and stirred in at the last minute. Dinner will happen, and then you'll still have 8 pairs of pants to sew and an entire wash tub of laundry waiting for your attention. But first, dinner. The stew has been simmering for 45 minutes when you hear the distinctive sound of your husband's footsteps on the stairs. You've learned to recognize his specific rhythm, heavy tread, slight pause on the 4th floor landing where the railing is loose, then continued climb. It's the sound of exhaustion made audible, each step weighted with 12 hours of factory labor. He pushes through the door at 7,023 PMU. Note the time because punctuality is one of those small victories you cling to in a life full of uncontrollable chaos. He's coated in a fine layer of cotton dust that makes him look prematurely grey, like someone sprinkled him with aging powder. His face is drawn, his shoulders slumped, and when he sets down his empty lunch pail, you can hear the metallic clank echo through the small room. Smells good, he says, which is generous because your vegetable stew smells primarily like boiled vegetables and hope. But it's his standard greeting, his way of acknowledging your effort without making you feel like the meal is inadequate, even though you both know 4 eggs and some root vegetables divided 7 ways doesn't quite meet anyone's definition of abundance. He peels off his work shirt, the grey one that used to be white, and you can see the damp patches where sweat has soaked through. Factory work in a poorly ventilated space with machinery generating heat is essentially paying someone to slowly dehydrate you over 12 hours. He washes his face and hands in the basin, the water turning grey with cotton dust and general factory grime, then settles into his chair at the table with a sigh that seems to come from somewhere around his boots. Dinner's almost ready, you announce, scrambling the eggs in your smaller pot. They cook quickly, turning from liquid to solid in under 2 minutes, and you fold them into the vegetable stew, stirring vigorously to distribute the protein as evenly as physics and hope will allow. The eggs break apart into small yellow ribbons throughout the soup, creating the illusion of abundance through aggressive distribution tactics. Everyone wash hands, you command, and your children obey with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Tommy attacks his hands with soap like he's trying to remove his fingerprints. Jacob makes a minimal pass under the water and calls it adequate. Rose washes properly because she's 13 and has recently developed opinions about hygiene. Now comes the logistical challenge that defines tenement dining. Your table seats 4 people comfortably. Your family numbers 7. The math doesn't work, but mathematics has never been the tenement's strong suit, so you make it work through creative problem solving, which is code for some people eat in shifts while others wait. Your husband gets the first and most substantial serving. This is non-negotiable. He's the primary wage earner. He spent 12 hours operating machinery, and shorting him on dinner would be like shorting your car on gasoline and then wondering why it won't run. He needs calories to generate more wages to buy more food. It's circular logic that happens to be true. You ladle a generous portion into his bologna of the few matching dishes you own, a wedding gift from 1897 that survived 8 years of tenement life through careful handling and luck. The stew looks better in the bowl than it did in the pot. The vegetables have softened into submission, the eggs have distributed themselves prettily, and the steam rising from the surface suggests warmth and comfort, even if the actual nutritional content is debatable. He eats quickly, mechanically, the way men eat when they're refueling rather than enjoying. You've learned not to attempt conversation during the first 5 minutes. She needs to achieve a basic level of not starving before his brain can allocate resources to speech. This is fine. You've got your own bowl now, and you're doing the same calculation, consume sufficient calories to continue functioning while leaving enough in the pot for everyone else. By the early 1900s, nutritionists were just beginning to understand concepts like vitamins and balanced diets. But this knowledge hadn't trickled down to tenement families who were still operating on the older model of eat whatever keeps you alive until tomorrow. Scholars debate whether tenement families were malnourished due to poverty or due to ignorance about nutrition. But the answer is clearly both you can't eat vitamins you can't afford, and you can't prioritize nutrition education when basic survival is consuming all your cognitive resources. Rose and your mother-in-law eat next, sitting at the table's remaining 2 chairs while your husband finishes his second helping. Yes, second helping, he needs it, and you've portioned accordingly, knowing that feeding him adequately now prevents bigger problems later, like couldn't work because too weak from hunger, or got injured because dizzy from lack of food. Jacob, Tommy, and your brother-in-law eat third shift, the 3 of them crowded around the table with mismatched bowls and spoons. Tommy's bowl is chipped, revealing the white ceramic underneath the painted pattern. Jacob's is actually a large cup that's being optimistically classified as a bowl. Your brother-in-law, who's been silent all day, working his own job at a different factory, gets a proper bowl but a bent spoon that curves slightly to the left, making eating an exercise in compensating for flawed utensils. You eat standing up, leaning against the counter, because all the chairs are occupied and sitting on the floor seems like admitting defeat. Your stew is lukewarm by the time you get to it, the vegetables having achieved that texture somewhere between cooked and surrendered to entropy. The eggs are barely noticeable except as occasional yellow fragments that remind you protein once participated in this meal. The quirky historical reality, some tenement families ate in even more complex shift arrangements, with fathers eating first and best, sons eating second, and women and daughters eating whatever remained. This patriarchal food hierarchy was justified as practical economics, but was really just institutionalized discrimination disguised as household management. Your family is more equitable than most, though more equitable is a low bar when the baseline is men eat meat while women eat scraps. How was school, Rose? Your husband asks, having achieved sufficient fullness to enable conversation. Good, Miss Patterson said. I could help grade papers on Thursdays. Rose's excitement from earlier has returned, slightly dampened by hunger and homework, but still present. And there's a birthday party on Saturday that Jenny invited me to. Your husband looks at you with that expression that means, is this something we can afford? And you respond with a microscopic headshake that means, we'll discuss later, which really means, probably not, but let's not crush her dreams during dinner. The conversation continues. Tommy spills some stew on the table, and your mother-in-law immediately wipes it up with a rag, wasting not even a drop, because waste is sin in the tenement religion. Your brother-in-law mentions that his factory is hiring, which triggers a brief discussion about whether anyone knows anyone who needs work. This is dinner in a tenement, shifts, mismatched dishes, lukewarm food, and the constant underlying calculation of whether you fed everyone enough to survive until tomorrow while leaving something for tomorrow's breakfast. It's not the family dinner table you imagined as a child, but it's yours, and everyone's eating, and nobody's complaining. In tenement terms, that counts as success. Dinner dishes are cleared well. Cleared suggests a level of ceremony that doesn't exist when you're scraping the last bits of stew from a pot and dividing them between the 2 children who are still claiming hunger. In reality, the dishes are scraped, stacked by the wash tub that's still sitting there full of cold water and judgment, and added to tomorrow's problems list, which is getting concerningly long. But tonight presents a special circumstance. Tommy's bedbug bites need attention, which means he needs a proper bath. which means you need to heat enough water to fill your small tin bath tuber luxury item you acquired 3 years ago that lives under your bed when not in use and serves as your household's primary hygiene infrastructure. Baths in tenements aren't daily occurrences. They're special events, carefully planned and executed, usually happening on Saturday nights before Sunday church, or when someone is sick, or when the accumulated grime reaches levels that threaten social relationships. Tonight qualifies under medical necessity, which is category 3 in the bathworthiness hierarchy. You look at your laundry water, sitting there cold and patient, and make an executive decision that would horrify hygiene reformers, but makes perfect economic sense. You're going to heat half of that water for Tommy's bath, then use the bath water afterward for starting the laundry. It's the kind of multi-purpose water usage that tenement families perfected out of necessity. Water is heavy, hauling is exhausting, and coal to heat water costs money. Therefore, water gets used, reused, and used again until it can barely be called water anymore. You start the heating process by filling your largest pot and your 2 medium pots with water from the wash tub and arranging them on the coal stove, like you're conducting a symphony of slowly warming liquid. The stove is still hot from cooking dinner, which is the one advantage of making your bath decision now rather than later when the stove would have cooled and you'd need to restart it with more coal. While the water heat's a process that will take approximately 45 minutes because coal stoves operate on geological timescales, you retrieve the tin bathtub from its storage space under your bed. It's a shallow, oval affair, maybe 3 feet long and 18 inches deep, designed for sitting rather than full immersion. An adult can fit in it if they curl up into an uncomfortable question mark shape. A 5-year-old can actually spread out, which is one of the few luxuries of childhood poverty. By 1905, public bathhouses were becoming more common in immigrant neighborhoods, charging 5 to 10 cents for a hot bath with soap and a towel. These bathhouses were promoted by hygiene reformers who believed that cleanliness would somehow cure poverty, though historians still argue whether these facilities actually improved public health or just made middle-class reformers feel better about poverty they had no intention of actually addressing. "Tommy, you're getting a bath," you announce, and he looks up from his blocks with the expression of someone who's just been sentenced to something unpleasant. "Do I have to?" "Yes, you have to. You have bedbug bites and you're filthy. Come here. Let me check your hair." You sit him down and part his hair systematically, looking for lice. Because of course if you're dealing with bedbugs, you might as well check for lice collect, the whole set of parasitic infestations, really round out your tenement experience. Thankfully, you don't see any lice or nits. Small victory. You make a mental note to check more thoroughly later, but for now, Tommy's head appears to be hosting only the parasites that bite rather than the ones that colonize. Your mother-in-law has moved to her bedroom, the closet-sized one, probably to escape the chaos of bath preparation. Your husband is sitting at the table reading yesterday's newspaper that someone left in the hallway, getting his brief window of relaxation before bed and another factory shift tomorrow. Jacob and Rose are doing their homework in the corner, or at least pretending to. Rose is actually reading. Jacob is mostly staring at his paper and hoping learning happens through osmosis. The first pot of water achieves something approximating hot, and you pour it into the tin bathtub positioned in the middle of your main room. The water hits the metal with that distinctive sound, filling maybe 1/4 of the tub. Second pot goes in half full now. Third pot 3/4 full. You add 1 more pot of warm water and 1 pot of cold to achieve the right temperature, warm enough to be pleasant, cool enough not to scald. You test it with your elbow, a technique your mother taught you, which her mother taught her, passing down bath temperature assessment methods through generations of women who've been heating bath water since before indoor plumbing was even a concept. The water feels perfect, warm, welcoming, and expensive in terms of the labor required to produce it. "Strip," you tell Tommy, and he complies with the reluctant movements of a child who knows resistance is futile. His clothes reveal more bedbug bites scattered across his torso, and legs hose little vampires really enjoyed their Tommy buffet last night. You'll need to treat his bedding again tomorrow, maybe wash all the sheets if you ever get to the actual laundry. Tommy steps into the tub, and the water level rises to mid-shin on him. He sits down with a splash that sends water over the edge because 5-year-olds have never met a body of water they couldn't aggressively disturb. You grab your bar of soap-generic brown stuff that smells like industrial cleaning supplies and broken dream sand, begin scrubbing. Ow! You're hurting me. I'm removing dirt that's apparently glued to your skin. Hold still. The quirky historical detail: some tenement families would bathe multiple children in the same bathwater in sequence, youngest to oldest, on the theory that the younger children were less dirty. This economized on water heating, but meant the oldest child essentially bathed in liquid dirt. Other families went oldest to youngest so the little ones didn't have to sit in teenage grime. There was apparently a whole philosophical debate about optimal bathing order. You scrub Tommy's neck, behind his ears, under his armhole, the places where dirt accumulates with suspicious enthusiasm. The water starts turning grey almost immediately, which tells you this bath was overdue. You wash his hair with soap, working up a minimal lather because the cheap soap doesn't really want to foam, it just wants to exist as a brown solid that reluctantly participates in cleaning. Don't get soap in your eyes. It's already in my eyes. Then you shouldn't have moved when I said hold still. You rinse his hair by pouring a small pot of clean water over his head. He sputters and complains, but emerges significantly cleaner than when he entered. The bathwater is now distinctly grey and contains visible particles of dirt that have abandoned Tommy's body for aquatic freedom. Out, you command, wrapping him in your one decent towel well. Decent is relative, it's threadbare and rough, but it's clean and mostly absorbent. You look at the bathwater. It's grey, yes, but it's still wet, still warm, and you've got a wash tub full of dirty clothes that need washing. The water has another act in it before it earns retirement. This is tenement economics. Nothing is single use. Everything serves multiple purposes, and water heated once should work at least twice before you grant it permission to exit via the drain. You've wrestled Tommy into his nightshirt still slightly damp because you didn't have the patience to fully dry him, and he was squirming like an eel trying to escape captivity. And now the evening stretches before you with that particular quality of exhausted leisure. The work isn't done. Those 8 remaining pairs of pants are glaring at you from across the room, and the laundry water is still waiting for attention. But there's a brief window between survival labour and collapse into bed where something resembling relaxation theoretically exists. Your husband has finished his newspaper and is now staring at nothing in particular with the glazed expression of someone whose brain has officially clocked out for the day. He's earned this vacant staring 12 hours of factory work buys you the right to sit motionless and think about absolutely nothing. You going to Kowalski's, you ask, referring to the corner saloon 3 blocks away, where men gather to drink beer that costs a nickel per glass and socialise in ways that women aren't invited to participate in. It's called networking, or hearing about job opportunities. But mostly it's about sitting somewhere that isn't your tenement apartment, drinking something that isn't chicory coffee, and complaining about factory foremen with other men who understand the specific nightmare of industrial labour. He considers this, rubbing his face with both hands. I should. Might hear something about the dock work opening up, but I'm tired. This is the perpetual calculation. The saloon costs money and uses energy he doesn't have, but it's also where information flows, where job opportunities are discussed, where the informal labour network operates. Missing saloon time means missing potential opportunities. Attending saloon time means spending precious nickels on beer. Go for an hour, you suggest, making the decision for him. 1 beer. Show your face. Come home by 9. He nods, grateful that you've made the decision so he doesn't have to use brain power on it. He stands, retrieves his cat from the hook by the door, and heads out. You hear his footsteps descending the stairs, getting fainter, then disappearing into the street noise below. By 1900, saloons outnumbered grocery stores, churches, and schools combined in many immigrant neighborhoods, leading temperance activists to declare them dens of sin-destroying family life. Historians debate whether saloons were genuinely harmful or actually served as vital community centres, providing social services, political organising and unemployment insurance through informal networks. The truth, frustratingly, is both saloons were simultaneously exploitative businesses, profiting from workers' wages and essential social infrastructure that nothing else adequately replaced. With your husband gone, the apartment feels simultaneously emptier and more yours. The evening entertainment options stretch before you like a menu at a restaurant you can't afford. You could read if you had books and sufficient light and eyes that weren't exhausted from 12 hours of close sewing work. You could socialize with neighbors, which costs nothing but energy you're not sure you have. You could finish those 8 pairs of pants, which is technically work rather than entertainment, but would at least provide the satisfaction of completion. Or you could simply exist in this space between obligations, breathing air that smells like coal smoke and bath water and humanity packed too tightly together. Rose has pulled out her one precious book, a novel she borrowed from the lending library, something with a lurid cover showing a woman in a dramatic dress clutching a letter. You can't see the title from here, but you know it's one of those sensational stories about love and betrayal and probably someone dying of consumption while declaring their eternal devotion. Rose is 13 and discovering that fictional drama is substantially more appealing than real tenement life, which is honestly fair. "Can I read aloud?" she asks, looking up with those hopeful eyes that suggest she desperately wants to share this story with someone who will appreciate its emotional depths. "After I finish these pants," you respond, because you've been saying, "After I finish these pants," for 3 hours now, and at some point you should probably actually finish them. You return to your sewing station at the table, thread your needle by the light of the kerosene lamp which you've turned up slightly, damn the expense, because you're tired of squinting and pick up where you left off. 8 pairs, 32 cents. The difference between having a small cushion against next week's disasters or being exactly as financially precarious as you are right now. Jacob has abandoned all pretense of homework and is now playing some complicated game with Tommy involving wooden blocks and rules that apparently change every 30 seconds based on who's winning. The game appears to involve building towers and then knocking them down while making sound effects, which is basically the toddler version of construction and demolition industry training. Your mother-in-law emerges from her room carrying her mending basket, the constant companion, her evening entertainment, her meditation practice. She settles into the chair your husband vacated and begins working on a shirt that belongs to Jacob, reinforcing a seam that's threatening to divorce itself from the rest of the garment. Her hands move slowly, arthritis making each stitch a negotiation between intention and physical capability. But she persists because clothes don't mend themselves, and buying new clothes costs money that exists only in theoretical economies where people have disposable income. From the apartment above, you hear music, not the terrible violin practice from earlier. That boy has apparently given up for the night, possibly after his family threatened violence. But actual music. Someone's playing an accordion, and they're actually good at it. The melody is melancholy and vaguely Eastern European, the kind of music that makes you think about places you've never been and lives you'll never live. It's beautiful in a way that makes your chest ache slightly. Mrs. Petrov's voice joins the accordion, singing in Russian at "Least you think it's Russian. You're not actually sure, but it sounds Slavic and mournful." Her voice is rich and full, untrained but powerful, the kind of voice that in another life might have performed in concert halls instead of tenement apartments. Other voices join in apparently. This is becoming a building-wide sing-along situation. The quirky historical detail, tenement sing-alongs were common evening entertainment, with residents gathering on fire escapes or in hallways to perform folk songs from their home countries. These impromptu concerts served as cultural preservation, community bonding, and free entertainment all rolled into one. Some scholars suggest this tradition influenced the development of American popular music, though proving that requires more archival research than currently exists. You find yourself humming along, even though you don't know the words or really understand the language. There's something universal about the melody, something that transcends the specific cultural context and just speaks to the general human experience of being far from home and tired and somehow still finding reasons to sing. Rose has abandoned her book to listen, and even Jacob and Tommy have paused their block destruction to attend to the music. Your mother-in-law's hands have stilled on her mending, and her eyes have that distant look that suggests she's travelling backward through time to somewhere that exists only in memory. The song ends, and there's a brief moment of silence before someone upstairs starts a different song, this one faster, more upbeat, with a rhythm that makes you want to tap your foot despite your exhaustion. You hear laughter, stomping feet, keeping time, the sound of people who have nothing material but still possess joy and music and each other. This is the tenement evening entertainment that settlement houseworkers and social reformers never quite understood. It doesn't require facilities or programs or organized activities. It emerges organically from people living pressed together, sharing walls and stories and songs, creating community out of proximity and necessity and the basic human need for something beautiful in lives that are otherwise relentlessly difficult. You return to your sewing. 7 pairs left. The music continues above you. Rose picks up her book again. Tommy and Jacob resume their block warfare. Your mother-in-law stitches her endless repairs. Outside, somewhere in the night, your husband is in a saloon nursing a nickel beer and hearing about dock work. The rats are having meetings in your walls. The bedbugs are planning tonight's feeding schedule. The city breathes around. You, alive, exhausting, beautiful, terrible, yours. Just 7 more pairs of pants and you can call today's work finished. You finish the final stitch on the 8th pair of pants at 8,000 for 7p me. You know this because you glance at the clock on your neighbour's wall visible through the window, one of the few families who own such a luxury item. 50 pairs complete, $2 earned. Your fingers are cramping into permanent claw shapes, and your back feels like someone's been using it as a construction site, but the work is done. You tie off the thread, bite it to cut it, and add the completed pants to your stack of finished piecework that you'll return to the factory tomorrow. Small victory. You'll take it. You'll take it. Now comes the evening ritual that no one warns you about when you're young and foolish and thinking about getting married and having children, the nightly safety inspection, or as you've come to think of it, the inventory of everything that might kill your family while you sleep. Routine. First priority. Chamber pots. During the day, you empty them as needed, but nighttime requires strategic planning because you're not making multiple trips to the communal toilet in the dark if you can avoid it. The hallway gas jet provides minimal illumination, and the stairs become significantly more dangerous when you can't see them properly and you're carrying a container of human waste. People have died from stupider falls. You collect the chamber pot from your bedroom accumulated contributions from afternoon and early evening and grab Tommy's small one from under his cot. Both are unpleasantly full, which means you're carrying approximately 15 pounds of liquid waste that has very strong opinions about its existence. The smell is immediate and aggressive, cutting through even the ambient tenement odour with assertive biological frankness. "I'm going to the toilet," you announce to your mother-in-law, who nods without looking up from her mending. This announcement serves multiple purposes. It tells her where you are, it establishes temporary supervision of the children as her responsibility, and it creates a verbal record in case you trip on the dark stairs and die. At least someone will know where to find your body. The hallway is dimly lit by that single gas jet, which has been burning continuously since this morning and will continue burning until someone in the building's management chain decides it's time to turn it off for maintenance, which happens approximately never. Gas lighting in tenements was simultaneously a safety feature. It provided illumination for shared space, and a safety hazard. Gas leaks could and did kill entire families in their sleep. By 1905, carbon monoxide poisoning from gas leaks killed hundreds of tenement residents annually in New York City alone. The deaths were often attributed to natural causes or weak constitutions before people fully understood that invisible gas could silently asphyxiate you. Historians still argue whether landlords' reluctance to convert to electric lighting was due to cost concerns or genuine ignorance about the dangers, though cynics suggest it was probably both. You navigate the stairs carefully, chamber pots held away from your body because spilling would be catastrophic both practically and socially. Mrs. Goldstein's chamber pot incident happened 2 years ago, and people still bring it up. Tenement residents have long memories for humiliating mishaps. The communal toilet is blessedly empty. This is luck, pure luck, because the evening hours usually see heavy traffic as families complete their pre-bedtime routines. You empty both pots into the toilet, pull the chain, and listen to the cistern's reluctant gurgle as it attempts to flush. The flush is more theoretical than actual, but you've done your part. You rinse the pots with water from the hallway. Tap cold water that makes your hands ache and begin your return journey. On the way back, you pass Mr. Kowalski coming down the stairs with his own chamber pot. He nods, you nod. Neither of you acknowledges what you're both carrying. This is tenement etiquette. We all have bodily functions. We all deal with waste management, and we all pretend we don't see each other during these moments. Back in your apartment, you return the chamber pots to their designated location's bedroom, under Tommy's cotton move onto the next item on your nightly safety checklist, the fire escape inspection. Your apartment's window opens onto the building's fire escape, a metal structure bolted to the exterior wall that serves multiple functions: emergency exit route during fires, supplemental living space during hot summers, laundry drying rack, social gathering spot, and occasional bedroom for people who can't fit everyone inside their actual apartments. Fire escapes were mandated by building codes after multiple tenement fire disasters, but the quality of construction varied wildly from "actually might save your life" to "will definitely kill you faster than the fire would have." You open your window, it sticks, requires shoving, finally surrenders with a screech that probably wakes someone on the 4th floor, and lean out to survey the fire escape. You're checking for several things. 1. Drunk people sleeping on the landings. This happens regularly enough that you've developed a protocol. If it's someone you know, you wake them and send them to their own apartment. If it's a stranger, you alert your husband or another male neighbor, because waking strange drunk men is how women get assaulted. Tonight, the fire escape is clear of unconscious humans. Good. 2. Structural integrity. You give the railing a shake, testing whether it's still attached to the building or whether today's the day it decides to divorce itself from the brickwork and plummet to the street below. The bolts seem secure. The metal doesn't feel unusually loose. This structure will probably survive another night. 3. Obstacles in the escape route. Some tenants use fire escape landings as storage, which is both illegal and incredibly stupid. Storing combustible materials on the fire escape defeats its entire purpose. Tonight you see some laundry hanging on the landing above you, which is annoying but not immediately life-threatening. You make a mental note to mention this at the next building meeting, if there ever is a next building meeting, which there probably won't be because your landlord avoids tenant meetings like they're contagious diseases. The quirky historical detail: some tenement families actually slept on fire escapes during summer heat waves because their apartments became uninhabitable ovens. Fire departments officially discouraged this practice, while unofficially acknowledging it was often the only way families could survive July and August without dying of heat stroke. You lean back inside and close the window. It sticks again, requires violence, finally complies. Your final nighttime check involves the gas jets inside your own apartment. You've got 2, one near the ceiling that provides general lighting, another near the table for task illumination. Both are currently burning. Both are supposedly safe. Both could theoretically develop leaks and kill everyone while they sleep. You turn down the table lamp to its minimum setting. Can't turn it off completely because stumbling around in total darkness is dangerous, but reducing the flame conserves gas and reduces the already minimal risk of something catching fire. The overhead jet stays at medium brightness because complete darkness in a tenement apartment means someone will definitely trip over something or step on someone else. Your husband returns at 9 hours and 8 p.m., smelling like beer and tobacco smoke, his eyes slightly glazed in that way that suggests he's achieved the mild intoxication that makes factory work tomorrow slightly more bearable to contemplate. He doesn't say much, just grunts a greeting, begins preparing for bed. The apartment is settling into nighttime mode. Children are in their sleeping clothes. Your mother-in-law has retreated to her closet bedroom. The building's noise level is decreasing from deafening to merely loud. You've checked the fire escape, confirmed the chamber pots are positioned correctly, assessed the gas jets, and verified that nothing is immediately going to kill anyone tonight. This passes for security in a tenement. You've done what you can. The rest is up to structural integrity, gas company maintenance, and whatever deities handle the safety of poor families living in buildings that barely meet building codes. Time to attempt sleep. Bedtime in a tenement isn't a single event, it's a complex logistical operation that requires the spatial reasoning skills of a master chess player combined with the diplomatic finesse of a United Nations mediator. Your 3-room apartment needs to transform from living space for 7 people to sleeping space for 7 people, which sounds straightforward until you remember that furniture doesn't magically disappear and humans require horizontal surfaces to sleep on. The first step involves clearing the main room of its daytime functions. Your sewing materials get packed into their wooden crate and shoved against the wall. Tommy's blocks get swept into their basket. Well, swept is generous. You kick them toward the general vicinity of the basket and declare close enough. The chairs get stacked in the corner because you need floor space for what comes next. Under the main room's 2 narrow beds live the folding cots, thin metal frames with canvas stretched across them, designed by someone who understood economy but had never personally experienced comfort. You pull out 2 cots. They fold like angry accordions, requiring specific manipulation to unfold without pinching your fingers or collapsing unexpectedly. You've mastered this through years of practice and accumulated finger injuries. The cots unfold with metallic screeches that announce to the entire building that the Kowalczyk family is going to bed. You position them strategically. 1 cot goes parallel to the existing bed where Rose sleeps, creating a narrow pathway between them that's approximately 18 inches wide. The second cot goes perpendicular near the window because that's the only remaining floor space that can accommodate a sleeping human without blocking the door or creating a fire hazard. Now comes the complex mathematics of human distribution. You've got 1 main bedroom where you and your husband sleep, 1 double bed. 1 closet bedroom where your mother-in-law sleeps, 1 narrow bed, 1 main room with 2 permanent narrow beds and 2 folding cots, 7 humans requiring horizontal sleeping surfaces. The permanent beds in the main room are designated for the children. Rose gets 1 bed to herself because she's 13 and has recently developed extremely vocal opinions about personal space and needing privacy and not wanting to share with her disgusting brothers. Your brother-in-law, husband's younger brother who's been temporarily staying with you for 6 months, gets 1 of the cots. He's 21, works at a different factory, contributes $4 per week to household expenses, and sleeps in his clothes because undressing requires privacy he doesn't have. His cot is positioned near the window, which means he gets fresh air and also gets woken up by every street noise, but he's never complained. Complaining when you're living in someone else's apartment as a charity case isn't really an option. The second cot remains empty technically. It's your emergency overflow bed, used when someone is sick and needs isolation, or when relatives visit and need somewhere to sleep, or when the bed arrangements need temporary reconfiguration for reasons that emerge with tenement regularity. By 1905, housing reformers documented tenement families with 8 or more people sleeping in apartments smaller than 400 square feet, with multiple people sharing beds and floors being used as additional sleeping surfaces. Some scholars argue this density fostered strong family bonds, while others point to the documented health issues, lack of privacy, and psychological strain. The answer, once again, is both. Rose, bed, you announce, and she sighs with the dramatic weight of someone being asked to climb Everest while reciting Shakespeare. She's been reading her library book and has reached what she claims is a crucial part where Elizabeth is about to discover that Mr. Thornton isn't actually. Now, Rose. She marks her place with a scrap of fabric, closes the book with theatrical slowness, and moves toward her bed. She's developed this elaborate bedtime routine that involves rearranging her pillow 17 times and adjusting her blanket with the precision of someone preparing for surgery. You suspect this is less about actual comfort and more about asserting independence through control of her immediate environment, but you let it go because choosing battles with 13-year-olds requires strategic thinking. Jacob, Tommy, bed. Tommy goes willingly because he's exhausted from a full day of being 5 years old. Jacob resists because he's 9, and resisting bedtime is apparently encoded in 9-year-old DNA. "I'm not even tired," he claims while simultaneously yawning. "Bed, anyway. Tomorrow exists whether you're tired or not." He shuffles toward the bed with the defeated posture of someone who knows the battle is lost. You help Tommy climb up Thursday's positioned against the wall, the safer interior position. Jacob climbs in after him, and immediately they begin the nightly negotiations about who's taking up too much space, whose elbow is where, and who breathed in whose direction. "Figure it out," you tell them in the parenting style known as strategic disengagement. They'll squabble for 3 minutes, reach an acceptable détente, and be asleep within 10 minutes. This is the routine. It happens every night. You stopped micromanaging it 2 years ago when you realized your intervention didn't actually speed the process. Your brother-in-law has already claimed his cot and is lying down fully clothed, staring at the ceiling with that expression of someone who's thinking about their life choices and wondering how they ended up sleeping in their brother's main room in a tenement on the 6th floor of a building that smells like cabbage and broken dreams. "You need anything?" you ask him, because you try to maintain some level of hospitality even when you're exhausted and your apartment is literally too small for everyone living in it. "I'm good," he responds, which might be true or might be the polite lie people tell when they're dependent on someone else's charity. Hard to know. You distribute blankets with the care of someone rationing precious resources during wartime. Each bed gets 1 blanket, which sounds inadequate until you remember that the coal stove has been burning all day and your apartment maintains a temperature somewhere between uncomfortably warm and actually might suffocate. In winter, blanket distribution becomes more complex. You layer everything you own and still wake up cold. But tonight, in early 1900s autumn, 1 blanket per sleeping surface is adequate. The quirky historical detail: some tenement families would pool their blankets and coats into 1 communal pile, with everyone sleeping under the shared warmth. This maximized heat retention, but minimized personal space to essentially 0. Other families maintained strict individual bedding assignments, even if it meant some family members were colder than others. There were apparently philosophical debates about whether collectivism or individualism was the better approach to not freezing to death. Your mother-in-law emerges briefly from her closet bedroom to say goodnight to the children. She kisses each one on the forehead with that grandmother efficiency that conveys affection without excessive sentiment. Then she disappears back into her tiny room, closing the door with a soft click that announces she's done with today's obligations. You survey your transformed main room. 3 children in 2 beds, your brother-in-law on his cot, narrow pathways between sleeping surfaces that require careful navigation to avoid stepping on humans. The room that was kitchen, dining room, living room, workspace and play area for the past 16 hours has now become bedroom for 5 people. Tomorrow morning it will transform back. This is the daily shape-shifting that tenement living requires. Your husband is already in the bedroom, probably already in bed, probably already unconscious, because 12-hour factory shifts don't leave energy for prolonged bedtime routines. You turn down the gas jet to its absolute minimum, leaving just enough light so that if someone needs to get up in the night, they won't break their ankle on furniture or accidentally step on another human. "Good night," you say to the room in general. Mumbled responses come from various sleeping surfaces, already half-asleep children, and your brother-in-law whose own exhaustion is catching up with him. You head toward your bedroom, stepping carefully over the narrow space between cots, avoiding the wooden toys that somehow evaded the earlier cleanup. Behind you, the main room settles into its nighttime configuration, breathing humans, creaking cots, the endless ambient sound of a building that never fully sleeps. Tomorrow you'll do it all again in reverse. Your bedroom is barely larger than the bed it contains, plus a narrow dresser with a cracked mirror and approximately 2 square feet of floor space where you can stand while getting dressed if you're willing to bump into things. The room has one small window that looks out onto the air shaft, that vertical column of trapped air that runs through the building's center, theoretically providing ventilation, but actually just creating an echo chamber for every sound, smell, and argument happening in the adjacent apartments. Your husband is already in bed, sprawled across 3/4 of the mattress in that position men achieve when they're unconscious before their body hits the horizontal surface. You nudge him over. He grunts, shifts minimally, creates approximately 14 inches of space that will have to be sufficient. You blow out the candle on the dresser. Can't afford to burn candles all night, and the ambient light from the gas jets in the other room plus the street lights 6 stories below provide enough illumination that the darkness isn't complete. You lie down on your 14 inches of mattress, pulling the thin blanket up to your chin. The mattress has a valley in the center where years of 2 people sleeping have compressed the stuffing into a permanent dip. You're perpetually rolling toward the middle, fighting gravity's attempt to crush you against your husband's unconscious form. Your body aches in that comprehensive way that suggests every muscle and joint has filed a formal complaint with management. Your fingers throb from 12 hours of needle pushing. Your back protests its treatment. Your legs remember the water bucket stairs. Your shoulders are having a disagreement with your neck about which one suffered more today. This is your normal. This is every night. Tomorrow you'll wake up and do it again, and your body will lodge the same complaints, which you'll ignore with the same determination. You close your eyes and attempt to will yourself towards sleep. The building has other plans. Through the wall to your right, one you share with the Rosenberg family, you hear their argument beginning. It starts quietly, just raised voices, but within 30 seconds it's escalated to shouting. You can't make out every word, but you catch the highlights, something about money, something about his mother, something about you never and you always, which are the universal phrases of marital disputes regardless of language or culture. Mrs. Rosenberg's voice rises to that particular pitch that suggests she's moved past anger into fury. Mr. Rosenberg responds with volume, apparently believing that whoever shouts loudest wins the argument. This is tenement marriage counseling. No privacy means no secrets, and everyone within 50 feet learns exactly what the Rosenbergs are fighting about, whether they want to or not. By 1900, domestic violence was so common in tenements that neighbours often didn't intervene unless it sounded like someone was being actually murdered. The thin walls meant everyone heard everything, but the informal code was to ignore it unless blood was involved. Social reformers were just beginning to challenge this norm, though historians still argue whether this was genuine progress or middle-class outsiders imposing their values on working-class communities who had developed their own coping mechanisms. From the apartment behind you, through the wall opposite the Rosenbergs, you hear the O'Malley baby crying. This child has lungs that could power a factory whistle. The crying starts as a whimper, escalates to a wail, then achieves that special frequency that seems designed by evolution to penetrate walls and prevent all adult humans within hearing range from achieving rest. Mrs. O'Malley's voice joins in, singing something, probably an Irish lullaby, though it's hard to tell over the baby's determined screaming. Your husband doesn't stir. Men possess this magical ability to sleep through anything once they've achieved unconsciousness. Factory whistles, crying babies, arguments, explosions, none of it penetrates. You've tested this theory multiple times, once literally shouting his name from 18 inches away, and he just kept sleeping. It's either a superpower or selective hearing refined to an art form. Above you, 7th floor, definitely the Chen family, someone is coughing. It's a deep, wet, rattling cough that goes on, pausing only for breath before resuming. You've heard this cough before. It's been getting worse over the past 3 months, progressing from occasional throat clearing to this sustained performance that suggests tuberculosis or some other respiratory disease has taken up residence in someone's lungs. The thing about tenement coughing is that you can't ignore it. You lie there counting the coughs, creating patterns, turning someone else's medical emergency into your insomnia soundtrack. Tonight you count 7 coughs, pause 4 coughs, pause 9 coughs. The person, you think it's Mr. Chen, though it could be his older son, finally stops and you hear liquid being spat into something. You try not to imagine what that liquid looks like. Historians still argue whether tuberculosis spread so rapidly in tenements due to overcrowding, poor ventilation, malnutrition, or all 3 factors working in concert to create perfect disease transmission conditions. The answer was obviously all 3, but early 1900s public health officials often blamed immigrants' unhygienic habits rather than the structural conditions that made hygiene nearly impossible. From somewhere, indeterminate sound travels so creatively through the building that pinpointing origin requires detective work. You hear a couple engaged in intimate activities. The rhythmic creaking, the muffled sounds, the complete lack of privacy that means 7-year-olds in adjacent apartments are learning about adult relationships earlier and more explicitly than anyone intended. You turn your head toward the wall, as if changing your listening angle will somehow make it less audible. It doesn't work. The Rosenberg argument has escalated further. Something crashes plate, cup, something ceramic, meeting wall or floor with terminal velocity. Mrs. Rosenberg shrieks something in Yiddish that you don't understand but recognize as probably very insulting. Mr. Rosenberg responds in kind. Their children are presumably in the next room, listening to their parents destroy each other verbally and possibly physically, learning relationship models that will echo through generations. You hear footsteps in the apartment, above heavy steps, someone pacing, back and forth, wearing a path in their floor which is your ceiling. The steps pause, resume, pause again. Someone who can't sleep, or someone working a night shift who's home at odd hours, or someone wrestling with insomnia or anxiety or any of the 1,000 things that keep tenement residents awake at night. From the hallway, you hear someone climbing the stairs. Slow steps, unsteady, definitely drunk. The steps pause on your landing, and you tense slightly because drunk people do unpredictable things. But the steps continue upward, probably heading to the 7th floor, someone's husband returning from the saloons at an hour that will cause a fight tomorrow. The O'Malley baby has achieved a second wind and is crying with renewed vigor. You sympathize with both the baby and Mrs. Aspiring. O'Malley the baby is probably teething or sick or just furious about being born into a tenement, and Mrs. Zisses. O'Malley is probably beyond exhaustion into that realm where you're crying along with your crying baby because everything is terrible and sleep is a myth. From your own apartment's main room, you hear Tommy whimpering in his sleep. Nightmare, probably. Or the bedbug bites are itching. Jacob's voice murmurs something soothing, and Tommy quiets. This is brother care, the kind that develops when children share beds and learn to comfort each other in the dark. The quirky historical detail that keeps you awake. Some tenement residents claimed they could identify their neighbors by sound alone, the specific pattern of their coughs, the rhythm of their footsteps, the pitch of their arguments. The walls were so thin that people became unwilling experts in each other's lives, able to diagnose illnesses, predict divorces, and track pregnancies just by paying attention to the acoustic evidence transmitted through plaster and lath. The building never fully sleeps. Even at this hour you estimate it's nearly 11 o'clock based on the rhythm of street sounds. Below there's constant activity. Someone's always awake, always moving, always coughing or crying or arguing or loving or existing in ways that penetrate walls and remind you that privacy is a luxury that tenements simply don't offer. You lie in the dark, listening to the symphony of tenement nighttime, the arguments, the babies, the coughs, the intimate moments, the footsteps, the random crashes and voices, and evidence that 200 people are living their lives in this vertical community, whether you want to hear them or not. Your body is exhausted, but your mind won't quiet, tracking sounds, cataloguing noises, maintaining awareness, even when you desperately need rest. Tomorrow will arrive whether you sleep or not. The factory whistle will blow. Your husband will leave for another 12-hour shift. You'll haul more water, sew more pants, fight more bedbugs, feed everyone somehow, and do it all again. But first, you need to sleep. If only the building would let you. The Rosenberg argument eventually exhausts itself around midnight, not because they've resolved anything, but because even rage has limits when you've been awake since 4:30 in the morning and tomorrow's factory shift starts in 7 hours. The shouting diminishes to bitter muttering, then silence, then the sound of their bed creaking as they settle into angry sleep on opposite edges of their mattress, backs turned to each other in that universal posture of marital resentment. The O'Malley baby finally surrenders to exhaustion, its cries tapering from wails to whimpers to blessed silence. You hear Mrs. O'Malley singing one final lullaby, her voice cracking with fatigue, then nothing. The baby sleeps. The mother probably collapses beside the cradle, too tired to even make it to her own bed. The coughing from upstairs pauses. Maybe Mr. Chen has finally achieved sleep, or maybe he's just resting between rounds, gathering strength for the next bout of respiratory distress. You choose to believe he's sleeping because the alternative is too depressing to contemplate at this hour. The couple engaged in intimate activities finishes their business. You hear a final creak, some murmured words, then silence. Even passion yields to exhaustion eventually, especially when you've been working 12-hour shifts and need to do it again tomorrow. The drunk person on the stairs has apparently made it to their destination or passed out somewhere along the journey. Either way, the footsteps have stopped, and that particular crisis has resolved itself or become someone else's problem. The street below has quieted to its minimum overnight volume. You can still hear occasional sound, later night delivery wagon, distant voices, a cat fight in an alley, the rhythmic clop of a single horse passing beneath your window, but the daytime cacophony has reduced to occasional punctuation marks in the general silence. This is the window. This is the brief period between midnight and dawn when the building approaches something like quiet, when most of the 200 residents have achieved sleep or at least horizontal rest, when the constant noise that defines tenement life drops to a manageable hum rather than a sustained roar. By the early 1900s, noise ordinances existed in cities but were almost never enforced in tenement districts, where authorities seemed to believe that poor people either didn't need quiet or didn't deserve it. Some scholars suggest this reflected class biased the assumption that working-class families were inherently noisy and couldn't be expected to maintain the sound standards of wealthier neighborhoods. Other historians point to practical enforcement challenges. How do you police noise in buildings where 200 people live stacked vertically and walls provide essentially zero sound insulation? Your breathing begins to slow, syncing with your husband's deep, steady rhythm beside you. He's been unconscious for hours, already halfway through his night's rest, while you've been lying here cataloguing the building's nighttime symphony. But now, finally, your body is beginning to override your mind's tendency to stay alert and track every sound. You feel yourself softening into the mattress, the valley in the center becoming less uncomfortable and more like a gentle hollow designed to cradle you. Your aching muscles begin to release their tension, letting go of the day's accumulated stress and strain. Your fingers stop throbbing quite so insistently. Your back settles into something approaching comfort. Through the window, the one that looks out onto the air shaft, you can see a small rectangle of night sky. No stars, obviously. City light pollution and air shaft geometry makes stars impossible. But there's darkness up there, real darkness, the kind that exists beyond gas jets and street lights and the constant human-generated illumination of urban life. The quirky historical detail that finally lets your mind rest. Some tenement residents claimed they could achieve better sleep in tenements than in quiet suburban homes because they'd become so accustomed to noise that silence actually kept them awake. The constant background sound of 200 lives became white noise, soothing rather than disturbing, a audio blanket that signaled safety and community rather than chaos. Tommy shifts in his sleep in the next room, murmuring something unintelligible. Jacob doesn't respond. Hawes is deep in whatever dreams 9-year-olds have, probably involving sticks and adventures and freedom from homework. Rose breathes quietly on her bed, her library book tucked under her pillow where she thinks you don't know she keeps it. Your brother-in-law's cot creaks as he rolls over, finding a new position on the unforgiving canvas. Your mother-in-law's bedroom is silent. She's been asleep for hours, having perfected the skill of immediate unconsciousness through decades of exhaustion. She lies in her narrow bed in her closet-sized room, dreaming whatever dreams 70-year-old women dream when they've survived immigration, poverty, and raising 6 children in conditions designed to break people. The building itself makes small sounds, wood creaking as temperatures shift, pipes settling, the eternal small adjustments that structures make throughout the night. These aren't human sounds. They're the building's own breath, its slow metabolism, the ongoing process of existing as a physical structure housing 200 souls. Your eyes close. Not a conscious decision, they simply become too heavy to keep open. The darkness behind your eyelids is complete and welcoming, a private darkness that belongs only to you, despite the fact that you share this room, this bed, this building with so many others. You drift, not quite asleep yet, but not quite awake either. That liminal space between consciousness and dreams, where the day's events replay in fragmented form, water buckets, needle and thread, bedbug bodies popping under your thumbnail, Tommy's face after his bath, the stew bubbling on the stove, Rose's excited voice talking about school, your husband's tired eyes. The milk wagon will come again in a few hours. The routine will repeat. But for now, right now, in this brief window between midnight and dawn, you're drifting toward rest. Finally, blessedly, completely. And as you sink deeper into that space where consciousness fades and sleep takes hold, let the sounds of the building wash over you like gentle waves. The occasional creak, the distant murmur, the soft breathing of your sleeping family, these aren't disturbances now. They're lullabies, proof that you're not alone, that life continues around you even as you rest. Your body is heavy against the mattress, so heavy that moving even a finger seems impossible, unnecessary. The aches that defined your day are fading into background sensation, still present, but no longer demanding attention. You're warm beneath your thin blanket, warm enough, and the coal stove's lingering heat wraps around the apartment like a gentle embrace. Tomorrow exists somewhere out there in the future, but right now there's only this moment, the darkness, the quiet, the slow rhythm of breath and heartbeat. The milk wagon will come when it comes. The factory whistle will blow when it blows. The water buckets will wait in their corner, patient and understanding, knowing they'll be filled again, but accepting that right now, you need this rest more than anything. Let your mind release its grip on the day's worries and calculations. The rent will get paid somehow. The children will be fed somehow. The work will get done somehow. It always does, doesn't it? You've survived every day until now, and you'll survive tomorrow too. But first, you need to sleep, need to let your body repair itself, need to drift down into dreams where tenement walls don't exist and water flows from taps without anyone having to carry it up 6 flights of stairs. The building breathes around you, its sleeping residents creating a soft chorus of human existence. 200 people finding rest in this vertical village, each in their narrow beds or folding cots, each carrying their own burdens, each deserving this brief escape into sleep. You're part of that chorus now, your own breathing joining the collective rhythm. Sleep comes softly, finally, like a gentle hand smoothing your hair. The day releases you. The night embraces you. The smallest hours hold you carefully as you drift drift into darkness that's peaceful and complete. Tomorrow the milk wagon will clatter on cobblestones and the routine will begin again. But tonight, right now, you're floating in that perfect space where nothing hurts and nothing needs doing, and the world has paused its demands just long enough for you to rest. Sleep now. Sleep deeply. Sleep well. The tenement will still be there in the morning,